Chapter 2305. Wu Yin, Sword Maiden, and Lin all stared blankly at the scenes unfolding before their eyes. What was going on? Just a moment ago, Luo had been brimming with confidence and determination to destroy Flowing Gold's essential world. How did he suddenly die from the backlash? Was the backlash from the divine mirror world really that terrifying? Everything happened too quickly and too suddenly. The three celestial beings didn't know what to do at this moment, and their minds went blank for a short period of time. It was as if the three of them had expended a lot of effort to capture their enemy, only for one of them to stab a knife into the enemy's chest, only to stab himself to death. It felt like a dream. Weren't the four of them trying to kill him together? Did Master Luo really die just like that? Sword Maiden murmured. No, that's impossible. Master Luo is the most powerful among the three of us. How could he die just like that? There's no way he would die. Lin shook her head relentlessly. However, right at this moment, one of Di Wu's wings suddenly burst into flames. The heavenly beings could sense this, and their faces turned deathly pale again. This was an undeniable fact. No matter how they tried to deny it, this was the truth. Flowing Gold had said that it would take on 4 people at once, and the heavenly beings had thought that this was the beginning of a violent battle. In reality, if they had fought honestly, it would indeed have been a violent battle. However, they had made an extremely foolish decision. They had forcefully killed Luo, who was the most powerful among them, 4 against 1, and they even gave away one for free. How could they justify this? At this moment, Tina, who was chasing after Di Wu, suddenly had a slight change in her expression. She slowed down in an instant, and Lin could sense the change in Tina's expression. What is it, little Na? I'm fine. Tina shook her head with a smile. Someone tried to invade my divine mirror world, and I beat them back. Oh. And Lin nodded, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face as he looked at Di Wu. At this moment, somewhere in the White Nectar Sea. We have to avenge Master Luo, Lin said through gritted teeth as she wrapped the heavenly strings around the Flowing Gold. How? Are we going to try to destroy Flowing Gold's heavenly Tao? Sword Maiden's brows furrowed slightly as she recalled Luo's tragic fate. Of course not. Lin let out a clear grunt and exerted force with all 10 of her fingers. A series of terrifyingly tough threads cut into the Flowing Gold's flesh. As the man screamed in agony, Lin used all her strength to pull her fingers inward, and the heavenly threads instantly shredded Flowing Gold's body into countless pieces. Fresh blood splattered, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. This scene was as tragic as when Luo died. Flowing Gold's essence of the heavenly Tao has already been severely wounded. If we attack his body on the Tai Chu continent multiple times, we'll have a chance to kill him, Lin suggested with a serious expression. The sword lady felt that it made sense. With a twirl of the blade in her hand, the great heavenly Genesis sword seal that had fused with Flowing Gold's body was completely unleashed, transforming into scarlet gold sword chi that pulverized Flowing Gold's body into particles. Humph! Wu Yin punched towards the sky, scattering the ink-red Genesis chi that Flowing Gold had released in the air. The aura of Flowing Gold began to disappear. Did you succeed? The sword lady looked around with her sword in hand. Lin stood in the air, and her hands danced through the air like clouds and mist. Pure white threads intertwined and fused with heaven and earth to unleash their greatest senses before turning toward a certain spot in the air. A speck of ink-red Genesis chi suddenly appeared. Immediately afterward, like a rapidly proliferating cell, the speck of ink-red blood began to appear. Then, its aura surged explosively. The blood speck exploded, and Flowing Gold's completely unscathed body appeared in the air. The sword lady's expression was as cold as ice. A god of creation stage true demon tribe cultivator sure is troublesome. Wu Yin also felt a headache coming on. This level of resurrection is even more ridiculous than the blood tribe cultivators who can be reborn from a single drop of blood. Does he really not die as long as the world is destroyed? Lin interlaced her fingers, and the threads of heaven and earth faintly surrounded flowing gold. Her eyes were sharp as she said softly, Master Luo has already established a connection between flowing gold and the world he created. If we kill flowing gold now, we will be able to severely injure his heavenly Tao. The heavenly beings all understood what she meant upon hearing this. They turned their eyes toward flowing gold and found that although his physical body was not injured, both his God of Creation stage aura and the power of Tao were significantly weaker than before. It was clear that he had been severely injured. At this moment, whether it was Lin, the Sword Lady, or Wu Yin, all of their gazes became terrifying, and their auras surged like the sea. Flowing Gold, who had successfully killed Luo, was just about to mock them when he discovered that the power of the heavenly Tao was too much for him to handle. Clearly, the desolate ancient heavenly beings wanted to use Flowing Gold's blood to wash away the humiliation they had experienced. Flowing Gold no longer cared about mocking them. He raised his head and shouted without hesitation, "Are you ready? If you don't make a move now, I won't be able to hold on for much longer." Dong! A dull sound came from the sky. It broke the tense atmosphere on the battlefield. The three heavenly beings all looked up into the sky. There was a round stone there. A stone that had no sense of existence, and had miraculously been ignored by them for a long time. For some reason, the heavenly beings were used to ignoring it, treating it as if it had no life or aura, as if it was just an ordinary stone on the side of the road. However, it was only on that day that everyone noticed it. It was already too late. The ordinary-looking stone had been transformed into a world stone with the sun, moon, and stars within it. On the surface of the stone was the scene of a world. There were mountains, rivers, birds, beasts, insects, fish, and the rise of thousands of races. Everything could be seen there, and one would be deeply immersed in it. It was as if their consciousness would be drawn into that world. Even though the Sword Lady, Lin, and Wu Yin possessed extremely strong willpower, they could not help but be dazed for a moment. "This stone seems to be different," Wu Yin said in a daze. "Be more confident. Please get rid of the seams." The Sword Lady's expression darkened. Only now did she discover another enemy. What did this mean? What had the enemy done during that long period of time? Lin crossed her 10 fingers, and countless murderous heaven threads suddenly appeared from all sides of the stone. With extreme sharpness and tenacity, they shot toward the stone in the middle. Her decisiveness was even greater than that of the Sword Lady. Before her companions could react, she had already made the first move. However, the heaven threads, which could tear apart the protective wall of Flowing Gold's Genesis Chi and powerful physical body, produced a screeching sound when they collided with the stone. Only a faint dent appeared on the world stone. In the next moment, a burst of energy from an unknown source erupted from the inside of the stone and tore apart all the heavenly threads wrapping around it. Rumble! A deafening roar sounded. The stone fell toward them. Chapter 2306. It's falling down. Get out of the way. Lin and the Sword Maiden were both startled as they dodged to the side. Dodge my ass, I'm going to smash it. Wu Yin's arms bulged as he threw a punch at the strange falling rock. Boom! The earth-shattering fist energy exploded. The momentum of Wu Yin's fist seemed to have collided with an unimaginably hard object. Not only did it not shatter the stone, the force of the recoil even cracked the bones in his hand. Wu Yin's confidence was completely shattered at this moment. Not only did this rock look like a world, but it also felt like an entire world was crashing down on it. Ah! A strange crushing force traveled through Wu Yin's fist and spread throughout his entire body, making him feel like he was being crushed by an entire world at every moment, and his body felt like it was about to collapse. "Let's go help him!" Lin yelled as billions of heavenly threads shot out from the void, forming a net to stop the rock from falling. The Sword Maiden also condensed her 3-foot-long azure sword into a massive sword over 30,000 feet in length, which she slammed toward the falling rock. Boundless sword chi surged forth like an ocean. Boom, boom, boom. The combined attacks of the two primordial heavenly gods caused the rock to tremble, but it still stubbornly continued crashing down, causing Wu Yin's arms to bend and twist. Ow, ow, ow. Wu Yin wailed in pain. Hold on. Lin gritted her teeth as the heavenly threads wrapped around her fingers frantically pulled on the rock. Her slender, snow-white fingers felt like they were about to snap under the pressure of the threads. The Sword Maiden's massive sword slammed down with all of her strength as well. In the end, the three primordial heavenly beings combined their strength to force the world rock to a stop. Under the rock, Wu Yin's entire body was covered in blood. His powerful arms were twisted and deformed by the weight of the rock, and his muscles trembled uncontrollably as if he was on the brink of death. The Sword Maiden and Lin's faces were also pale. It was clear that they had expended a lot of energy to force the rock to a stop. If it wasn't for their help, Wu Yin might have ended up being smashed to death by this attack. Phew! We finally made it. A smile finally appeared on Wu Yin's face after surviving the ordeal. Made it? Can you really withstand it? Flowing Gold's mocking voice came from afar. The three primordial celestial beings were stunned. At this moment, they saw in despair that the World Stone had taken the initiative to distance itself. No. It can't be, Wu Yin said with a trembling voice. Again? The Sword Lady's scalp went numb. At this moment, the World Stone had already begun to accumulate its aura. Lin materialized an extremely powerful heavenly thread in her hand, making it resemble an extremely sharp needle as she stabbed it viciously into the rock. With such a huge body, a single point of defense shouldn't be too strong. Chi. The heavenly silk really relied on its extremely strong penetrative power to pierce into the boulder. However, before Lin could rejoice, she discovered that after her heaven thread pierced into the boulder, it was quickly digested and absorbed by the boulder like nutrients. How is this possible? Lin was dumbfounded. At this moment, the World Stone, which had already accumulated its momentum, crashed toward them again. It was as if a world was crushing them mercilessly. Well done, Mou. Flowing Gold was completely reassured upon seeing this, and he began to recover from his injuries. His essence of the heavenly Tao had been severely damaged, so he didn't actually have much combat prowess left. He could crush Tao integration stage super mighty figures, but against one of the 10 primordial celestial beings, he would be crushed even if he had to fight one-on-one, let alone 4. As such, he decided to stop and watch the show. After preparing for so long, Mou had turned this battlefield into its home turf. Sure enough, Mou's second attack was still aimed at Wu Yin. Wu Yin didn't dare to face it head-on, and he immediately fled. He felt like such a huge rock would definitely be very slow, and he would be able to perfectly evade its attack with his extraordinary movement technique. However, what he didn't expect was, as the rock hurtled toward him, the space around it suddenly became over 100 million times denser. The laws around it also changed, and the laws that prevented him from moving quickly transformed into countless restrictions that bound Wu Yin tightly. Impossible! How could it change the laws of the Tai Chu continent? Lin was in the middle of evading, and she was astonished to find that she was also bound by countless laws. The Sword Maiden wore a grave expression. It didn't change the laws, it used the laws of its own world to forcefully interfere with the laws of this space. Lin was even more astonished to hear this. It could do that? At this moment, Wu Yin's blood-curdling screams sounded again. He was once again slammed into by Mou. Wu Yin was very fast, but the surrounding environment was restricting him, so he couldn't run at all. However, the speed of the rock didn't change at all. Everything was sealed, and only the World Stone was in constant operation. Thus, Wu Yin was in a tragic situation. Even though he had unleashed the boundless power of the heavens at the critical moment, and his hands were still bracing against the oncoming rock in an attempt to resist the other party's attack, however, Mo had brought an entire world crashing down upon him. That powerful crushing power could instantly crush a huge planet, and the essential power that was completely integrated into the impact of the rock could inflict the most profound blow to the enemy's essence. Wu Yin looked very strong. At this moment, he felt death approaching. His body began to crumble. His essence began to be crushed. Lin and the Sword Maiden knew that they couldn't let Wu Yin die, so they desperately blocked Mo's attack and even forcefully used the ultimate celestial technique again. However, this time was not the same as the last time. Mo was more powerful and more determined. Even though its body had been pierced by countless extremely sharp heaven threads, even though the surface of its body had been torn apart by the Sword Lady's supreme killing sword slash, it still pressed forward, grabbing onto Wu Yin to fight back. In the end, Wu Yin let out a roar filled with unwillingness. The rock completely crushed Wu Yin's body and absorbed it. Lin and the Sword Maiden didn't expect that Wu Yin wouldn't even be able to withstand Mo's second attack and would die just like that. They were celestials above the heavenly god realm, so how did they become so weak? It was clearly 1 against 3, but Mo had the absolute advantage and killed one of the desolate ancient celestials. This was the difference in strength. After Mo crushed Wu Yin, it didn't say a word. Instead, it silently gathered its aura on Lin and the Sword Maiden, causing the two celestials to feel extremely pressured. Another wing of Diwu, who was flying and escaping, burned. The original 10-winged celestial was now only left with 6 wings. The worst thing was that as the number of wings decreased, his speed of escape also decreased, and the number of times he was abused increased rapidly. Each attack made him physically and mentally exhausted, and he could barely run anymore. Chapter 2307. Roar! The sea python roared and opened its mouth like a black hole. Its teeth glowed with a crimson divine light as it pounced toward the mermaid on the surface of the sea. Tiany's sparkling and translucent lips slightly opened and spat out a colorful bubble. The bubble expanded rapidly, and the sea python's mouth was about to bite down on Tiany. However, the colorful bubble, which had expanded to thousands of feet in size, blocked its mouth. It was as if a primordial sea python had leaped out of the sea with a colorful ball in its mouth, setting off huge waves and stunning the world. This scene should have been very beautiful. Unfortunately, this colorful bubble ball was still expanding crazily. The sea python's teeth, which could tear apart a god of creation, were unable to bite through this bubble. This bubble was probably the hardest bubble in the world. The bubble expanded rapidly under the sea python's horrified gaze, and the sea python's mouth became bigger and bigger. The sea python was on the verge of tears, but it couldn't spit it out and couldn't bite through it. Furthermore, it was still expanding. What kind of despair was this? "Don't be afraid, I'm here to save you." The Sea King, who was wielding his golden pitchforks, stepped on the waves and wanted to use his golden pitchforks to puncture the bubble in the sea python's mouth. There was a hint of excitement in his eyes. It was clear that puncturing bubbles gave him an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. But before he could do anything, a beautiful mermaid had already leaped out of the bubble, and her light pink fishtail swatted toward him mercilessly. The Sea King roared and stabbed his pitchforks toward the mermaid's fishtail. He was going to spear fish. Bam! A terrifying shockwave traveled toward him. The Ocean King was shocked to find that the transparent scales on Tiany's tail were even harder than divine weapons. When the golden trident pierced the fishtail, it exploded with a blinding light, and was unable to pierce through the scales at all. Immediately afterward, the Sea King was sent flying by the terrifying power of the fishtail. How many times had he been sent flying? He couldn't remember clearly anymore. At the same time that it was sent flying, the sea python finally couldn't hold on any longer. Its terrifying, abyss-like mouth was cracked open by the beautiful bubble. The sea python's blood-curdling cries echoed. Blood gushed out and dyed the white jade sea red. It was so frightened that it quickly dove into the bottom of the sea and fled frantically, seizing the opportunity to recover from its injuries. How many times had it failed to swallow the heaven reliance? The sea python could no longer remember. In any case, it was a cycle of failure, repeated defeat after defeat. The Sea King and the Sea Python were both injured and forced to retreat. Tiani did not choose to pursue an attack, but instead stood there quietly like a beautiful girl who had nothing to do with the world. The huge colorful bubble slowly floated down. Her misty eyes became slightly clearer as she stretched out her snow-white finger and lightly tapped the air. Bam! The colorful bubble, which was so hard that it could burst the mouth of the sea python, turned into countless tiny bubbles and dispersed like ordinary bubbles. Under the illumination of the sun, a beautiful ring-shaped rainbow appeared. Tian-yi stood in front of the rainbow and stared blankly. She seemed to be moved by the rainbow's beauty and smiled happily. The Sea King and the Sea Serpent were infuriated when they saw this. Was Tian-yi really fighting? Why did it feel like she was chasing away two mosquitoes before continuing to play with herself? The two powerful ancient beings felt like they had been insulted. They were proud beings, and they roared with rage as they continued to pounce toward Tian-yi. When the 10 primordial ancients appeared, their might was monstrous, and their extravagance was unimaginable. However, when the 5 God of creation unleashed their true power, the 10 ancient beings finally realized who the true gods of this world were. Within the mountains outside the White Jade Sea, Patriarch Zhu Yin was astonished. Tsk, how terrifying! I thought they were only new God of creation. How did they become so powerful? Even the Spirit Patriarch wouldn't be able to defeat the 3 living beings at their full power, right? In terms of spirit-body combat, he might even be the most powerful being I've ever seen. Blackstone spear techniques are also the most powerful spear techniques I've ever seen. Flowing Gold's regenerative abilities are even more powerful than Cyril's among the true demon tribe. Also, that Mou was able to transfer his source world to this world in this way. I have to say, it really broadened my horizons and left me gasping in admiration. As for Tian-yi, she's still hiding her true power. None of the 5 God of creation are weaklings. Patriarch Zhu Yin was astonished after witnessing the power of the divine mirror world. At the same time, he was also quite perplexed. This divine mirror world was far too strange. How could it be so bad? *SS. Xiaoru, are you really not going to attack? The young woman asked. Haha, I told you, now is not the time to attack. Besides, Anlin and the others are about to win. Ding Xiaoru chortled with glee. At this moment, Di Wu had already reached the shore of the White Jade Sea. The Xianshui turtle descended from the sky and rammed its turtle shell into Di Wu again. The earth also caved in from the impact of the Xianshui turtle's attack. Di Wu's internal organs had all been destroyed by that attack. He had just managed to knock the Xianshui turtle flying with a single punch. The vibrantly metal tiger had already transformed into a streak of golden light that instantly sliced off one of Di Wu's arms with its claws. Countless divine vines from the green wood dragon converged on Di Wu from all directions. The earth Kirin appeared beneath Di Wu's feet. The flaming vermilion bird's abdomen expanded, and its mouth opened as a terrifying flame power accumulated within. A fairy waved the divine mirror world sword, and a cold light flashed. No, I really can't take it anymore. Di Wu saw the attacks coming from all directions and felt the injuries in his body. He realized that he was at the end of the road. This was a slow death. No matter what mystic techniques he used, he was unable to break free from Anlin and Tina. He had tried everything he could think of. Nothing worked. He had thought that he would be able to use his boundless power of the heavens to fight a battle of attrition. However, Anlin and Tina's attacks were far more powerful than his rate of recovery, and his condition was deteriorating further and further. Life. What should we do? The heavenly heaven god asked. It felt like the pain it had endured today was more excruciating than any pain it had ever experienced. It had been killed at least 100 times and abused at least 1,000 times. The heavenly life god's exquisitely beautiful features were a little dazed. The paramount heavenly god was still replenishing Di Wu's life force energy, and it only reacted after being asked this question. Just hang in there, the heavenly life god replied instinctively. The heavenly sea god couldn't take it anymore. Stop dreaming. We can't hold on any longer. If things continue like this, we're all going to die here. Then what can we do? The heavenly life god's face furrowed in dejection. The heavenly sea god took a deep breath. Use it. Use the true form of Tao. Chapter 2308. The expressions of the other two paramount heavenly gods stiffened upon hearing the heavenly sea god's words. Tao True Manifestation was a buff spell technique that a paramount heavenly god could only use once. The heavenly sea god and the heavenly heaven god had already used their Tao True Manifestations, so the heavenly life god's Tao True Manifestation was the only one left. But were they really going to use it now? If they used it now, then they would lose the chance to dominate the rest of the battlefield. Would they be able to accept this outcome? Heavenly Heaven. The heavenly life god turned toward the heavenly heaven god. At this moment, the Earth Kiran's gravitational field had already begun to completely suppress Di Wu. The greenwood dragon's divine light green vines coiled over, and Di Wu desperately swung the realm blade to slash at the vines. However, the endless green vines still found an opening in the blade gleam and shot over, wrapping around the celestial's limbs. Let's do it. The heavenly heaven god paused momentarily before speaking. The heavenly life god pursed her lips, and her conflicted expression gradually cleared up. A green divine halo appeared above her head, which became brighter and brighter until the entire sky was illuminated by a green divine light. The divine light of life around her was like a blade that sliced through the green dragon vines. The flaming vermilion bird's breath descended from the sky, and a pure and terrifying crimson holy flame imbued with the power of the new 5 elements as well as heaven-crushing true intent descended from the heavens. Di Wu had almost been burned to death by this attack in the past. However, at this moment, a pure green divine light enshrouded his body and kept the monstrous flames at bay. The crimson holy flame exploded, burning a massive crater into the ground within a radius of over 500 kilometers. However, Di Wu was completely unscathed by the green wall of light around him. Roar! A tiger's roar shook the heavens. The vibrating metal tiger shot toward Di Wu. Its sharp claws were like scimitars that slashed at the green protective wall. It contained a shocking battle intent that could cut through everything. Bam! The extremely sharp golden claws struck the wall of divine light, and the wall caved in like jelly. Di Wu looked at the vibrating metal tiger with a mocking expression. He waved a hand, and a crimson blade appeared, which landed on the vibrating metal tiger's head. The sharpness of the scarlet blade was extremely terrifying. It actually managed to cut open the vibranium tiger's incomparably hard head. An extreme death will flowed along the scarlet blade and spread throughout the vibranium tiger's head. Ao, the vibranium tiger was in so much pain that it rolled on the ground. Its head, which was made of vibranium, actually became dull at a speed visible to the naked eye. It even began to rust and corrode. Is this my ultimate power? Di Wu did not look at the rolling vibrating metal tiger. Instead, he looked at the green divine halo around his heart with an infatuated expression. He turned to look at Enlin and Tina, and then raised his head proudly. His previous disheveled appearance had been completely wiped away, and he had regained his peerless confidence. Now it's time to show you what a true Deva is like. In the next moment, his expression changed drastically. Oh, blarg! He actually began to vomit large mouthfuls of blood. Enlin blinked. Is this the real celestial being? Do I look like that? Di Wu was enraged and raised his head. Blarg! Blood began to spurt out. Not only that, but his skin also began to crack. Tina was startled by the bloody scene before her. What's going on? Weren't you going to use your trump card? Why is he vomiting? Not only is he vomiting, but he's also melted, Anlin said expressionlessly. Di-Wu, who had only been handsome for 3 seconds, was now slowly melting like milk. No. No! Only now did Di-Wu truly feel death. The white milky liquid suddenly exploded. Di-Wu's life force began to dissipate. Anlin and Tina were both startled. Could it be that the enemy had used their trump card to blow him up? Right at this moment, an extremely beautiful woman suddenly appeared from the white energy. Her flowery dress fluttered in the wind, and her figure was lithe and graceful. Her features were as beautiful as the autumn moon in the sky, and her orange-red eyes were as beautiful as the sunset. This was the appearance of the goddess of life. The only difference was that the heads of the ocean and the sky had appeared on her shoulders, and 3 pairs of white celestial being wings had appeared on her back. The goddess of life looked at the 2 heads on her shoulders with disdain. It's all your fault. If it weren't for the fact that you don't have the true form of Tao, the formation wouldn't have lost its balance, and I, who is the most powerful, wouldn't have become the main body of the formation. Her words were filled with indignation and resentment. However, the aura that she was currently releasing was extremely terrifying. The entire sky had already been imbued with a boundless green divine light of life. The ground that had been ravaged by the battle was now covered in lush grass and flowers, creating a vibrant scene of life and vitality. This was all a result of the aura that the heavenly life goddess had inadvertently released. She had unleashed her true form of Tao, but it wasn't as earth-shattering as the paramount heavenly gods from before. Her true form of Tao was her original form, and no one knew whether this was due to the 3 true heavenly reincarnation formation or whether this was her original form. Even though the heavenly life goddess appearance hadn't changed, her aura was extremely powerful, and it was suffocatingly powerful. The Xianshui turtle descended from the sky toward the goddess of life. The goddess of life's body was as light and graceful as the wind, and she appeared right above the Xianshui turtle before crashing down with her pristine white palm. Boom! Terrifying green energy exploded from her palm before crashing into the Xianshui turtle's back. Countless cracks began to appear on the Xianshui turtle's extremely sturdy shell, and it caved in deeply. One had to realize that Di-Wu had struck the turtle countless times in the past, but he was only able to send it flying without being able to wound it. But now, a casual strike from the life goddess had heavily wounded the 5 spirits with the strongest defense and shattered the shell of the Xianshui turtle. Boom! The Xianshui turtle was slammed into the ground like a dead fish. Beside it was the vibrating metal tiger, and most of its body had already been decayed. Anlin knew that his opponent was not to be trifled with. This was even more powerful than the heavenly sea god and the heavenly heaven god unleashing their true forms of Tao at the same time. Was this the power of the 3 true heavenly reincarnation formation and the 1 true heavenly reincarnation flower? Thankfully, the immeasurable flower had been severely wounded, and the heavenly sea god and the heavenly heaven god had already unleashed their true forms of Tao. Otherwise, who knew how powerful this perfect 3 true heavenly reincarnation formation would be? Green ripples appeared around the goddess of life's body, as if it were a special life force field that was constantly proliferating into the surroundings. She turned toward Anlin with a mesmerizing smile. Anlin, you forced me to use my true form of Tao. Now, it's my turn to force you to use your trump card. I'm going to take your life. Chapter 2309. You're going to take my life force? Anlin faltered momentarily before a look of enlightenment appeared on his face. Hee, you want to force me to use my trump card? Do you have what it takes? He knew that the heavenly life goddess was already aware that he still had one last chance to self-detonate. However, he would have to pay with his life for this opportunity. The heavenly life goddess was clearly trying to force him to use his trump card. You'll know once you try. The life goddess reached into her long, dark green hair and took out a jade hairpin that was emitting colorful divine light. At this moment, the green-wood dragon had already conjured up a vast number of vines that swept toward the heavenly life goddess. The heavenly life goddess looked up at the vines with a faint smile. "You think you have the right to use your life force power against me?" She gripped the air. The life force field within a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers tremored violently. The vines began to wilt and decay before they even got close to the heavenly life goddess. The greenwood dragon that was circling in the sky let out a miserable howl as its dark green dragon body strangely turned yellow and black. In the end, it fell to the ground. Its bright eyes became lifeless as if it had been crippled. The woman turned to look at Enlin and slowly extended a slender hand. She spread open her fingers and pointed her palm toward Enlin as she spoke in a clear voice. "You can live or die with a single thought. This is the true ruler of life." She suddenly clenched her hand as she spoke. Enlin felt boundless life force energy enshrouding his entire body as a life force field within a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers took effect on his body at once. Thump! Enlin's heart thumped violently, and he began to die. His life came to an end at this moment. All of his life force energy was forcibly drawn toward the heavenly life goddess. This life force extraction technique instantly pierced through Enlin's divine body defenses and reached his life essence. Enlin instinctively used darkness to engulf the heavenly life goddess power. However, to his astonishment, the heavenly life goddess power was imbued with the power of the perfect heavenly being, thereby nullifying all of his heavenly darkness powers. Enlin was shocked. He didn't think that the heavenly life goddess attack would be so unpredictable, giving him no chance to react or defend himself. "Vermilion bird, Kirin, go!" The flaming vermilion bird let out a piercing screech before plummeting from the sky. The Kirin leaped up from the ground, and its entire body radiated with purplish-golden divine light. Countless layers of gravitational fields were applied to the life goddess in a frenzy, causing her to falter slightly. At this moment, the vermilion bird's fiery attack began to descend. 5 elements heaven-shattering, vermilion bird chaotic flames. This time, the vermilion bird's body had been forced to crash into the ground, and it was far more powerful than the chaotic flames it had released before. Just the heat radiating from its descent was enough to melt the earth within a radius of 5,000 kilometers into a boundless sea of lava. The life goddess slightly frowned. "You've ruined my flowers and grass again." She held the colorful jade hairpin in her hand and flicked her finger. The jade hairpin shot up into the sky like a rainbow thread and accurately pierced through the head of the flaming vermilion bird. The vermilion bird, which had a body of flames to begin with, felt as if its head had exploded. Its body leaned back, and even its monstrous, furious aura stagnated. Fire is a crystal of energy. It is born in full bloom, but it also dies when it is extinguished. A dainty smile appeared on the life goddess' face as she looked at the colorful jade hairpin that had fallen back into her hand. "And you'll have to listen to me." The flaming vermilion bird suddenly let loose a shrill cry as the flames within its massive body began to dissipate at a rate discernible to the naked eye. In the end, its core exploded in the sky like dazzling fireworks, as well as a dazzling rain of fire. The life goddess looked on at the rain of fire in silence. The light from the flames reflected off her face, making her appear even more vibrant. "All right, stop flexing and go beat up Enlin." A discordant voice disrupted the woman's tranquil mood. The life goddess' brows furrowed slightly as she looked at the heavenly sea god on her shoulder. "This is my true form. I can do whatever I want, so shut up." Her majestic aura was unleashed unwittingly. The heavenly sea god was struck by a bone-chilling sensation, as if he were being stared at by an extremely dangerous monster that could kill him at any moment. He immediately shut his mouth obediently. Sure enough, her goddess-like appearance was just a facade. This woman was a tigress at heart. The life goddess was annoyed by the Earth Kiran's gravitational field, so she slapped the Earth Kiran's body into rubble. It was not her intention to use the true form of the Tao. However, she had already used her true form, so she was naturally going to do whatever she wanted. She had been tormented by Enlin so many times, and if she didn't return the favor now, how could she feel better? The life goddess continued to suck away Enlin's life force with one hand while pressing her other hand onto the 5-elemental heavenly slaughter formation on the ground. The formation tremored violently in her hand, and the essence of the formation quickly dissipated under her control before shattering with a resounding boom. The gold-vibrating tiger, Xianshui turtle, Earth Kiran, and Greenwood dragon all began to disappear as the formation crumbled. Their bodies dissipated into drifting energy. The woman turned to Enlin with a smile. "I've broken your formation." The terrifying formation that had once killed Emperor Wu was easily broken by the life goddess. This was indeed a surprise to Enlin. The life goddess gripped tightly toward Enlin, and her eyes narrowed with bliss as she sensed the boundless life force emanating from Enlin's body. "Watching you walk toward your death in my hands without being able to do anything is the best experience I've ever had," this life goddess, who could penetrate the power of the new 5 elements and ignore the power of darkness, was indeed a hopeless situation for Enlin to deal with. However, it wasn't like Enlin didn't have a way to break it. The life goddess was only bluffing when she said that she could control life and death with a single thought. At the very least, she couldn't do that against an enemy at Enlin's level. Life drain was a slow process of taking away life force. Enlin could choose to escape during this time, or he could use this time to fight for an opportunity to defeat the life goddess. However, Enlin still didn't move, as if he were a man who had lost his will to fight, waiting to die. Every lazy man was because there was a hard-working woman behind him. Elven light enshrouded Enlin's body in the next instant. This was a divine light that was a combination of golden and green, and it was like a transparent mirror that enshrouded Enlin's body. It was paramount and could isolate all things, including the life force field of the life goddess. The life goddess suddenly discovered that her control over Enlin's life had been severed, as if it had been separated by some kind of barrier. Her expression instantly darkened. Tina is ruining my plans again." The goddess of life's jade hairpin hurtled toward Enlin at extreme speed. "Enlin, I'm going to break this barrier of yours today." Chapter 23:10. Finger of the Heavenly Tao. Enlin pointed his finger at the incoming Yuzan. The golden finger light shattered the void and crashed into the jade hairpin, causing an earth-shattering collision. However, this pure and profound heaven-shattering move only managed to reduce the power of the jade hairpin slightly. The jade hairpin paused for a moment, then shot forward again. Bang! The sharp jade hairpin carried an absolute sense of death as it stabbed into the elven barrier, causing cracks to quickly appear on the barrier in front of Enlin. At this moment, the extremely beautiful elf appeared beside Enlin. "Little Na, how are you feeling now?" Enlin asked anxiously. He knew that Little Na was secretly analyzing the life goddess' new condition while he was using the 5-spirit absolute slaughter formation to stall her. The situation isn't good. She's still in the 3-phase true heavenly reincarnation formation and possesses all of Di Wu's powers. Due to the origin of Tao, her life force has reached an unimaginable level. Her overall abilities have increased tremendously. Tina pushed her palms forward, and divine light surged forth to repair Enlin's barrier in a frenzy. "Even I won't be able to last long. I haven't thought of a way to deal with her yet." Tina's words fell into Enlin's ears, and Enlin's expression became even more solemn. Meanwhile, above the white nectar sea, the battle between the 5 gods of creation and the 10 primordial deities had once again taken an astonishing turn. The 10 great ancients were the strongest creatures that Di Wu had summoned. In other words, they were all products of the 3-phase true heaven reincarnation formation. Now, after the life goddess had activated the true form of Tao, The three-phase true heavenly reincarnation great array's effectiveness was greatly increased. Correspondingly, the 10 great primordial era's most powerful creatures also received a terrifying boost of energy. Roar! The sky crocodile let out a low growl as its lumpy head mercilessly smashed into Black Stone's silver spear. That indomitable spear radiance was almost shattered by the collision for the first time. Black Stone felt the resistance coming from the spear in his hand. It was more than twice as strong as before. His tall figure was knocked back for the first time. The three creatures were using their spirit energy fields to repel the corrosion of the infernal sea. They were studying in front of the gate of hell. Suddenly, a strange wave swept through the gate of hell and the endless infernal sea. All of a sudden, the bodies of the evil spirits and devils that were pouncing towards the three creatures grew larger, and their teeth and claws became sharper and sharper. Their movements and strength also increased significantly. Roar! Hiss! Die! 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 They pounced at the three creatures even more crazily and crazily. Some of them were still blasted into mincemeat by the spiritual energy field, but some began to try to tear apart the spiritual energy field, wanting to attack the three creatures. The evil spirits and fiends had invaded the spiritual energy field, which was 100,000 zhang in radius. Some particularly powerful evil spirits had even stabbed their sharp claws into the bodies of the three living beings. These ghosts, why do they look like they're on drugs? The three creatures sensed the change, and the ominous premonition in their hearts became even stronger. The time limit of his secret technique was almost up. If he could not deal with this Hell's Gate in a short period of time, then the increasingly terrifying abyssal ocean might devour his existence. At this moment, the abyssal ocean began to expand explosively again. From a radius of 100,000 kilometers, it had now expanded to a radius of 200,000 kilometers. Everywhere one looked, one could only see a sea of deep red that made one panic. All of the other gods of creation, as well as the West Sea heavenly vessel and the immortal celestial being, silently shifted to avoid the expanding battlefield. Oi KK! This is way too insane. If this continues, the entire White Nectar Sea at the center of the Tai Chu continent is going to be engulfed by this sea of blood. Demon Emperor Siyu retreated as he looked at the roaring sea of blood. There were massive, terrifying shadows swimming within the sea of blood, exuding an aura that struck fear into the onlookers' hearts. He didn't even dare to imagine what the three living beings at the center of the sea of blood were like. In reality, the three living beings at the center of the sea of blood were indeed very troublesome. They were attacking him relentlessly, and the increasingly powerful demons and evil spirits were giving him a lot of pressure. He wanted to close the Hell's Gate, but he was completely unable to move it. It was like a gate that was supposed to be here, a gate that had been acknowledged by heaven and earth. No matter how he tried to move it or destroy it, he was unable to move it in the slightest. It was so easy to open the gate. Why was it so difficult to close the gate? The three living beings were unable to do anything about how to close the gate, and the expanding infernal sea was like a death sentence that was counting down the days of his life. In the sky above, Mou, who had already gained the upper hand, also encountered a problem. The Sword Maiden and Lin, who were about to be crushed to death in a few more minutes, were suddenly able to resist the Mou's stone attacks. Each and every one of the Mou's attacks was like an entire world crashing down upon them. However, the swordswoman's sword projection was so dazzling that it could split the heavens and the earth, and Lin's boundless heavenly threads that could connect worlds together formed a perfect defensive line, blocking the Moyu's attacks time and time again, and even counterattacking the rock. The two primordial celestial beings were so excited that they were about to cry. They had thought that they were going to die, but the sudden increase in their power allowed them to take control of the battlefield again. The two primordial celestial beings were going to fight today. All of the gods of creation were engaged in an arduous battle. Even Tian Yi, who had been taking a leisurely stroll in the park, was in a similar predicament. She had to face two supreme experts of the primordial era whose strength had skyrocketed. Moreover, they were two supreme experts of the primordial era who had not suffered any damage to their origin source. Their combined attacks not only doubled the pressure on Tian, it was multiplied several times. The Sea King had already transformed into a gargantuan divine spirit over 1,000,000 feet tall. He had 2 dragons on his shoulders and an abyssal Kuan beneath his feet. Each and every swing of his golden trident was able to tear open a massive abyss in the ocean. Tian didn't dare to take his attacks head-on, so she could only continue to evade. Ha ha! Hit me! Use your fishtail to slap me! The Sea King, who had been slapped away countless times by Tian Yi's fishtail, chortled with glee. All of the frustration in his heart had been swept away, and he swung his golden trident even more quickly. Tian Yi silently evaded the Sea King's attacks and didn't reply. All of a sudden, the ocean beneath her surged. A sea python over 100,000 feet in length charged forth before opening its cavernous mouth toward Tian Yi. Its mouth was as large as a city, and the crimson jagged teeth within its mouth were like a series of sharp mountain peaks, all of which exuded a destructive aura. Ha ha! Come and fight me! Keep fighting me with your bubbles! The sea python also opened its mouth in an extremely arrogant manner as it opened its cavernous mouth and bit down toward the beautiful mermaid above. Chapter 23:11. Tian Yi whipped her tail through the air in an attempt to escape the sea python's bite. At this moment, the Sea King suddenly crossed his tridents in front of his chest, upon which the vast power of the ocean surged forth for tens of thousands of kilometers. Power of the ocean, seal. Tian Yi could sense that all of the power of the ocean within the White Nectar Sea, regardless of whether it was the surging seawater, the rising mist, or the rippling space, all of them had completely sealed her movements and drastically reduced her speed. At this moment, the sea python finally had its wish fulfilled, and it completely swallowed Tian Yi. Ha ha! We've finally taken care of that stinky fish. She's so pretty, but she's such a vicious fighter. Serves her right. A joyful smile appeared on the Sea King's face upon seeing the sea python swallow Tian Yi. It's not over yet. My sawtooth is still grinding away at her protective divine light. Only when her protective divine light shatters will we truly succeed. The sea python said. Do you need my help? The Sea King didn't dare to underestimate Tian Yi. The sea python nodded. Inject your power of the ocean into me. I'm going to use your power of the ocean and the power of my intestines. I'm going to use both powers to suppress her. The Sea King immediately landed on the sea python's back and injected a steady stream of energy into its body. The gods of creation of the White Nectar Sea were engaged in a bitter battle. Meanwhile, all of the gods of creation outside the arena were beginning to stir. The heavenly life god has finally unleashed her true form, Nuwa suddenly said as she looked into the distance with a pair of gentle and natural eyes. Hee, do you want to fight? The heavenly lord of Tao and virtue chuckled. Nuwa's clenched fists slowly relaxed as she shook her head in exasperation. No, I still have things to do. Little Hong Ling held onto Nuwa's hand and asked in a quiet voice, Sect Leader Enlin, will you be able to secure victory as long as you defeat the heavenly life god? Hearing this, Nuwa finally had a genuine smile on her face. She rubbed the girl's head dotingly and nodded. Yes, as long as he can do it, he can win. It's just that. Nuwa looked up at the boundless green divine light of life before her with a concerned expression. The heavenly life god is far too powerful in her current state. She's even more powerful than I anticipated. It's still unknown whether Enlin will be able to win. There was something she didn't say. Based on Enlin and Tina's current performances, she estimated that Enlin's chances of winning were less than 30%, which meant that there was a very high chance that Enlin would lose. Rumble! Another energy explosion came from afar. In the center of the White Nectar Sea, demonic flames blotted out the sun. A gigantic heavenly vessel fell from the sky, giving off thick smoke. In the face of the combined attacks of Demon Emperor Siyu, the battling Buddha, Yun Menjing, Michael, and Demon Lord Lingu, it was finally unable to hold on any longer. The heavenly human tribe cultivators on the West Sea heavenly vessel were still engaged in a battle to the death. Countless cannon blasts were imbued with terrifying power, each of which was powerful enough to raze a continent to the ground. Even if they were to land on the White Nectar Sea, they would still be able to create massive tsunamis of over 100,000 feet in size. However, the 5 members of the Gods of Destruction team seemed to have been injected with chicken blood, and they were completely unfazed by the cannon blast. Heavenly Tao intoxicating demonic fist. God of Creation stage demonic flames erupted from Demon Emperor Siyu's body, and he evaded a few lethal cannon blasts like a drunken brawny man before crashing viciously toward the center of the West Sea heavenly vessel. His fist was imbued with the Tao of wine and peerless demonic power, and it instantly exploded. Boom! The West Sea heavenly vessel's defenses were torn apart again, and its hull, which was already riddled with scars, was mercilessly bisected by the massive fist. As the demonic flames surged, they ignited the wine that filled the air. The wine burned into a demonic flame that could devour people, forming an even more terrifying demonic flame that spread in the blink of an eye. The West Sea heavenly vessel was engulfed by boundless demonic flames. Deep into the night, under the starry night sky, the translucent white heavenly vessel was engulfed by red demonic flames, and it slowly plummeted toward the White Nectar Sea with a long tail of flames trailing behind it. It was as if the invincible and holy heavenly human tribe had fallen, creating a spectacular yet poignant spectacle. Demon Lord Lingu was accidentally struck by a cannon blast, and a massive hole was blasted into his massive body, but he still managed to land another powerful punch on the West Sea heavenly vessel. Yun Menjing's body was like a phantom as she weaved through the West Sea heavenly vessel's core offensive cannons, and the cannons in her wake exploded one after another. The battling Buddha even unleashed his strike of the heavenly Tao to pulverize the West Sea heavenly vessel's head, and millions of heavenly human tribe powerful beings were reduced to ashes by his strike. Michael also unleashed a sword strike toward the West Sea heavenly vessel. All of the top-tier powerful beings of the Tai Chu continent unleashed their final combined attacks, and the resulting explosions lit up the entire heavens. The heavenly human tribe powerful beings of the West Sea heavenly vessel resisted with all their might, but they were still unable to escape the fate of death. In the end, as the West Sea heavenly human tribe army fell one after another, as well as one powerful spell technique after another, its body began to disintegrate, and its energy began to spiral out of control. In the end, it exploded violently in the air, transforming into a massive blue sun that swept toward the surroundings. Boom! Terrifying oceanic energy exploded forth. The ocean within a radius of several thousand kilometers was incinerated into a massive crater. Not only were the immortal heavenly human tribe powerful beings in the distance affected, but even the spreading sea of blood was also forced back by this explosion. The entire White Nectar Sea was lit up by this explosion. A massive blue sun emanated the power of the ocean, creating a breathtakingly beautiful sight to behold. All of the heaven-crushing united army cheered with excitement upon seeing this explosion. They knew that the West Sea heavenly vessel had exploded, which meant that Demon Emperor Siyu had won. This was an extremely important victory. A smile also appeared on Shangguanyi's face as she struggled against the backlash of the heavenly Tao. The future was built on successive victories, and the destruction of the West Sea heavenly vessel army was definitely a monumental and crucial victory. Her comrades were way too powerful. She couldn't hold them back, so she had to negotiate with the heavenly Tao. At this moment, on the land outside the White Nectar Sea, the heavenly life goddess was still flexing, and the explosion in the distance didn't really affect her. She was trying her best to break through the final line of defense that Tina had set up for Enlin. However, the head on her left shoulder slowly turned toward the explosion in the white nectar sea. The heavenly sea god was staring blankly at the massive blue sun in the distance. It was brighter than the moon, but it wasn't as dazzling as the sun during the day. "It's gone. It's all gone," the heavenly sea god suddenly murmured to himself as tears welled up in his eyes. He once had a house and a car. He also had a bunch of underlings. However, his house had been destroyed by Lan Xiaoni, his car had been destroyed by Demon Emperor Siyu, and all of his underlings were gone forever. He had nothing left. Chapter 23:12. The heavenly sea god was extremely disconsolate. At the same time, the heavenly life goddess Colorful Jade Hairpin had already pierced deeply into the fairy barrier around Enlin's body. Enlin knew that he couldn't wait any longer. He had to make a choice now whether to fight or to run. "Let's go!" Enlin yelled at Tina as he stepped into the air, and his body transformed into a dark shadow that tore through space as he abruptly appeared before the heavenly life goddess, upon which a dazzling golden light erupted from his fist. 8 times heaven-crushing Kirin 5 elemental heaven-crushing fist. Boom! The space before him was instantly shattered by Enlin's fist. The heavenly life goddess extended a soft, delicate hand and laid it upon Enlin's fist. Rich green divine light enshrouded her palm, and a terrifying vortex of energy was formed between the two of them. The paramount power of the heavenly life goddess clashed violently with the power of heaven crushing and the new 5 elemental powers, and the power of the heavenly life goddess quickly began to erode these two powers. That's right, Enlin could sense that his power was quickly fading away. Just as he was about to unleash another attack, the heavenly life goddess' other hand suddenly materialized a blue and white heavenly realm blade, which she then slashed toward Enlin's body. Whoosh! Tina's fairy barrier was finally unable to hold on any longer and began to crack. The heavenly realm blade possessed the paramount power of the heavenly god, and it possessed the absolute ability to slice through the barriers of all world. Enlin's divine body was also unable to defend against this attack, and a bone-deep gash was inflicted upon his body, upon which blood splattered through the air. However, right at this moment, Tina suddenly appeared beside the heavenly life goddess, and she slashed her divine mirror world sword toward the heavenly life goddess' neck. The heavenly life goddess had used both of her hands to attack Enlin, and she had only just unleashed her power, which was the perfect opportunity for her to strike. The semi-transparent world sword swept through the air, sending countless ripples through the air. It was as if a faint light had flashed through the heavens. It was ethereal and difficult to detect, but it was also imbued with lethal killing intent. However, the life goddess' reaction was far beyond Tina's expectations. At the instant that Tina attacked, she moved her feet and retreated at the critical moment. The world sword sliced past her neck less than an inch away from it, and did not bring up any energy at all. At the same time, the majestic power of the ocean turned into a tsunami and blasted away the approaching fairies. Tina was just about to slice apart the tsunami before her with her sword when another streak of white light shot forth like an arrow from the heavens. It was hidden in the boundless ocean, and it possessed the paramount will of the heavenly Tao that could automatically search for the essence of the heavenly Tao. Even against a god of creation, it was absolutely lethal. Tina barely managed to pull back her sword to block the attack. The white light smashed onto the sword and pushed forward frantically. The origin attacks at the tip of the sword did not stop, and it actually wanted to destroy her world sword as well. Thankfully, her world sword was closely connected to the divine mirror world, so the life goddess attack was unable to destroy it. The white light seemed to have realized this as well, and it transformed all of its power into boundless destructive force, which continued onward as if it were trying to knock Tina to the ends of the earth. In the end, Tina was still unable to evade the life goddess double attack, and she was blasted flying for over 500 kilometers. The white light was constructed from the power of the heavens. It was an essential attack that was unleashed from boundless power of the heavens. This was a much more advanced and intricate attack than what Di Wu had unleashed. At this moment, Tina had already discovered this. The heavenly life goddess attacks weren't very powerful, but she was extremely proficient in the use of her power. Not only was she able to condense her power into a single point, but she was also able to control all types of miraculous effect. In other words, it was as if each and every one of her attacks had a life of their own. This was a life attack that could create miracles on the battlefield. Lin's attacks were all nullified by the life goddess' strange green light, and he was even struck by her sword. However, he still didn't back down. Instead, he suddenly opened his mouth and unleashed a burst of fragrant energy toward the heavenly life goddess. God of War heaven-blasting cannon. Terrifying golden energy erupted from Lin's mouth. He was like a giant dragon, and the scorching and violent God of War energy within his mouth engulfed the life goddess body. At the same time, an energy trajectory of several hundred kilometers was left in the air. Lin's verbal blast made him feel as if all of the energy around him had been slackened. It was clear that the energy around him had been blasted away by his verbal blast. When the energy disappeared, Lin was greeted by the sight of an exquisitely beautiful woman glaring at him with a menacing expression. Her face was unscathed, but her long, dark green hair seemed to have been slightly charred. Lin faltered slightly. Could it be that she had used her hair to block his attack? In the face of this beautiful woman's speechless gaze, he immediately unleashed another punch toward the life goddess body. Boom! This time, his fist landed solidly on the life goddess body. Lin could even feel the softness and elasticity of his fist. The life goddess body was slightly hunched over, but she was still glaring at Lin with a murderous look in her eyes. Lin was wondering if he hadn't hit her hard enough. After all, that punch would have been able to leave the heavenly earth god half dead, but the life goddess expression didn't even change in the slightest. "You've ruined my hair," the life goddess suddenly said. Lin faltered slightly before looking at the charred hair of the life goddess with a perplexed expression. "Perm your hair, it'll look better." The life goddess' eyes widened a little. "Die." The jade hairpin shot forth from her fingertips, slicing the air in half before hurtling toward Lin's head with a speed faster than lightning and faster than light. Lin was already on guard against the life goddess attack, and he hurriedly evaded. However, it was also at this moment that the space around him began to congeal. The heavenly god's AoE cannon began to take effect. The golden halo behind Lin began to rotate to its limit, and the power of the new 5 elements erupted around his body, dispelling the spatial suppression. His head narrowly dodged to the side, and the jade hairpin only grazed Lin's handsome cheek. However, before Lin had a chance to catch his breath, the jade hairpin suddenly changed direction and continued to stab toward his body at an even more terrifying speed. Lin was given a fright, and he immediately unleashed his movement techniques to evade. Whoosh! The jade hairpin tried to stab Lin's heart, but it only managed to puncture Lin's arm. Lin wanted to retaliate, but the jade hairpin continued to fly toward him with killing intent, leaving him with no choice but to evade. Whoosh whoosh whoosh! The jade hairpin slashed through the air in a dazzling, lethal trajectory. Its penetrative power and speed were unmatched. Even a god of creation could only see the red trajectory of death left behind by the jade hairpin. The entire space seemed to have been intertwined by countless red threads, accompanied by blood splattering from Lin's body. Evade, 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 evade. Lin unleashed his most powerful movement techniques in order to evade. In the end, he managed to escape. His body had only been stabbed several hundred times by the jade hairpin. Chapter 23:13. Lin didn't feel like he was being humiliated. The life goddess had attacked him several thousand times with the jade hairpin in a short period of time. However, he had only been stabbed several hundred times by the jade hairpin, and he had managed to evade all of the lethal attacks. Wasn't that something to be proud of? As for retaliating, that would be a little too much. Lin had focused all of his attention on evading the jade hairpin, but he was already struggling to defend himself, so how was he supposed to retaliate? The life goddess attacks were no joke. If he didn't pay attention, the jade hairpin would puncture not just his arm or waist, but his head and heart instead. Lin had no choice but to focus all of his attention on evading the attack. Die, die, die. The life goddess quickly swung her arms through the air, and the jade hairpin became faster and faster as its killing intent became more and more pronounced. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more and she would have been able to kill Lin. The life goddess focused all of her energy on her blade, and the jade hairpin's offensive prowess was unprecedented. It was able to tear through a divine body and pierce through the power of the 5 elements. The heavenly sea god's eyes widened with excitement, and he wanted to see Lin fall. However, the fairy in the distance had already charged over again. The life goddess harumphed coldly before extending her left hand and pushing it toward the direction that Tina was flying toward. Layers of indestructible sky barriers began to appear. Of course, she was aware that Tina was coming to harass them. She was already prepared for this. This sky barrier union, which was constructed from 99 world barriers, had been prepared specifically for Tina. The world barrier was already the most powerful world barrier aside from the world barrier of the Tai Chu continent. A single world barrier was enough to stump some new gods of creation, so what did 99 world barriers entail? That meant that there were 99 worlds between Tina and the life goddess. It would be impossible to break through them in a short period of time. However, Tina really did charge forward just like that. Super-dimensional divine technique, billion mirror light. The world sword in Tina's hand suddenly began to refract the stars in the sky, which converged to form countless dazzling streaks of light that crashed down upon the world barrier. A peculiar ripple began to proliferate outward. Every slash and every ray of starlight produced a certain resonance with the world barrier. The starlight was also reflected on the world barrier and then seeped in, causing the world barrier to reflect billions of stars like a mirror. After billions of stars appeared in the first barrier, the second barrier also started to reflect the stars in the first barrier like a mirror. Then the third barrier also started to change. 99 layers of barriers were pushed forward and penetrated at high speed. The life goddess' heart trembled when she saw that. Tina wasn't using brute force to break open the barrier. Instead, she was using a special method to infect the barrier with her own power. Almost in the next moment, the last barrier began to turn into a clear and empty starry sky. Billions of stars twinkled, and infinite starlight fell on the life goddess. Boom, 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 every flicker of light was an attack. In that instant, the life goddess suffered billions of shock. Go! The life goddess endured the pain of being incinerated by the stars and waved a hand toward the 99 barriers between worlds, upon which the barriers crashed down upon Tina. Since the shield could not block the enemy, it could be used as a hammer. Rumble! As expected, Tina was knocked flying by the barriers between worlds. The life goddess had successfully disrupted Tina's technique. However, just as the life goddess' attention was focused on Tina, Lin had already pulled out his 9 life vital disc and activated it. Purplish-golden vital energy fused with the heaven-crushing true intent to form a sharp needle that tore through space before hurtling toward the life goddess. You dare to stab me again? The life goddess was enraged, and she hurriedly unleashed a movement technique to evade the purplish-golden needle. The purplish-golden needle brushed past the life goddess' shoulder and tore open her floral dress, but it did not harm her snowy white skin. However, before she had a chance to retaliate, the purplish-golden needle quickly turned around and stabbed toward her body again. After fusing with heaven-crushing true intent, the primordial purplish-golden needles were peerlessly sharp and ethereal. They were able to transform the paramount powers of the heavenly gods into primordial energy and puncture the heavenly life god's life force energy. This time, the purple gold needle suddenly stabbed back, and the woman didn't have time to dodge, and finally cut a wound on the arm of the life goddess. "You want to run? I'll stab you to death." And Lin's hands danced through the air as the 9-life vital disc was activated to its maximum extent. The purplish golden needle transformed into a series of lethal afterimages that stabbed toward the life goddess in a frenzy. This was an extremely familiar scene. It was extremely similar to when the life goddess stabbed Lin. "How dare you!" The life goddess was enraged, and rich life force energy erupted forth, causing the purplish golden needle to falter violently. At this moment, the life goddess' colorful jade hairpin was already flying toward Lin at a speed even faster than Lin could control. Purplish golden heaven-crushing strike. Lin focused all of his power on the purplish golden needle, causing it to fly fearlessly toward the life goddess hairpin in a lethal trajectory. Boom! The two needles clashed in midair, and energy exploded violently. The power of death radiated from the jade hairpin like a crimson death lily, turning the entire heaven and earth around the heavenly life goddess crimson. Lin's primordial purplish golden needle was not to be outdone, and it erupted with the most ethereal power, turning the entire heaven and earth around him into a purplish golden color. Both of them had unleashed their most powerful attacks, and they were only continuing to increase their power. The shock waves spread further and further, far exceeding that of a normal clash between gods of creation. The dazzling light radiating from the shock waves even extended for millions of kilometers, slicing the entire central region of the Tai Chu continent in half. This was far more explosive than the West Sea Heavenly Arc explosion. All of the living beings fighting in the White Nectar Sea were completely stunned by this scene. Demon Emperor Cu and the battling Buddhas had just completed their battle, and they were all looking on with nervous expressions on their faces. All of them knew that the battle taking place in the distance was the most critical battle on the entire battlefield, and it would drastically impact the outcome of the entire battle. The clash between the two most powerful beings did not last for very long. Lin finally saw that a crack had appeared on his opponent's jade hairpin. He was ecstatic, and he unleashed all of his power as he roared with fury, "Break through!" Whoosh! The purplish golden needle erupted with energy. Boom! There was a loud explosion. The purplish golden needle exploded. Lin. Right before the man's incredulous eyes, the slightly cracked jade hairpin punctured the purplish golden needle, leaving a crimson trail in its wake before puncturing the man's heart. Pfff, blood blossomed like a flower. Lin was struck by a heart-wrenching pain. Immediately afterward, death descended like a tidal wave. Chapter 23:14. The heavenly life god's hairpin was imbued with the most terrifying power of death. After it pierced through Lin's heart, it had already left behind the power of death in Lin's body. The power of death instantly caused Lin's heart to decay and decay before it was reduced to the most unremarkable speck of dust. Giant Lin. Tina flew toward Lin with all her might as she yelled at the top of her lungs. Lin felt like he was extremely close to death. His heart had already been punctured, but the power of death was still relentless. It wanted to destroy his body as well. The power of death that was even darker than blood began to flow through his entire body. If things continued like this, Lin's entire existence was going to perish. Success! The heavenly life god smiled. This is an attack unleashed by the true manifestation of the Tao of life within the three-phase true heavenly reincarnation formation. Even if you had 10 lives, you wouldn't be able to stop death. Lin knew that the heavenly life god was telling the truth. This power of death possessed the special characteristics of Emperor Wu, which was that it was immune to the power of darkness. Furthermore, his new 5 elemental powers were unable to repress the power of death, and Lin's body was quickly becoming feeble, and he immediately pulled out 2 divine pills from his storage ring before swallowing them. Boom! Enormous amounts of life force energy exploded within his body, frantically healing his body as it clashed with the power of death within his body. If he was going to die, then he had to take 2 divine pills. The heavenly life god's brows furrowed slightly before relaxing again. Have you forgotten what I'm in charge of? The life force energy within your body is going to become nutrients for my power of death. Sure enough, the life force energy within Lin's body, which had only just recovered some of his organs, was quickly corroded and assimilated by the power of death. In the end, all of the life force energy within Lin's body rebelled and was assimilated into an even more aggressive power of death. The power of death had become even more powerful due to the divine pills that Lin had ingested. It was over. Lin was shocked. He frantically tried to find a way to break out of this situation. He threw almost all the energy he could into his body, turning it into a collision field of energy. However, there was nothing he could do. Tina was already charging toward him. However, there was no way the life goddess would allow Tina to approach her prey. She immediately engaged Tina in battle atop her colorful jade hairpin in an attempt to delay her. Judging from the current situation, Lin was already a dead man. However, the life goddess was very cautious and still didn't want Tina to get close to Lin. This little elf's power was too strange and unpredictable. The best way was to separate the two of them. That way it would be foolproof. Boom, boom, boom. Tina slashed her world sword through the air, clashing relentlessly with the colorful jade hairpin. She was just barely able to keep up with the speed of the heavenly life goddess jade hairpin, but she was still forced back by the immense power imbued within the jade hairpin. Lin was also engaged in battle, and his body was rumbling incessantly. Waves of energy clashed with the death energy, sending his body into the training field. It tore at him, and his internal organs were soon blasted beyond recognition by the energy. If things continued like this, even if the power of death didn't engulf him, he would still be blasted to death by the shockwaves from the clash of the two powers. This was a terrible feeling. He felt as if he had self-detonated countless times. Soon, Lin unleashed all of the powers he could think of, but none of them were able to repress the power of death. This was very depressing. Wasn't Lin just waiting for his death? Tina had created an opportunity for him, but he could only wait for his death? Wait. A thought suddenly occurred to Lin. He pulled out his evil-slaying sword, which was none other than his evil-slaying sword. Most of the evil-slaying sword's techniques could only be unleashed in conjunction with the heavenly god of darkness, so Lin had never used it in battle. However, things were different now. Little Xie, can I trust you? Lin looked at the inky black blade of his sword with a passionate expression. If you want to stab it, then stab it. Don't waste your breath. A tender and childish voice sounded. Lin's lips twitched. This little Xie was still so simple and violent. He didn't think any further before stabbing the evil-slaying sword into his stomach. Vanquish the heavens and slay all evil, purify. The inky black evil-slaying sword stabbed into Lin's body, and blood began to flow from his wound as his body shuddered from the pain. Right at this moment, the inky black sword began to transform into an extremely pure white color. It was glittering and translucent, as if it were a flawless piece of white jade that was filled with holiness and salvation. The flawlessly beautiful sword was enough to mesmerize all living beings. That's right, this was one of the 4 most powerful techniques of the evil-slaying sword, Purify. It could cleanse all negative effects from the target's body. Lin's cultivation base was now at the Dao integration intermediate stage, and the evil-slaying sword had also been fully awakened, so this technique was extremely powerful. An unimaginable power of purification began to spread through his entire body, as if it were a spring that was slowly flowing through his entire body, as if it were a clear river that could cleanse all impurities. In the blink of an eye, it clashed with the power of death. The explosive clash that Enlin had anticipated did not occur. The only thing he could feel was that the residual power of death within his body was diminishing at a rate discernible to the naked eye before being slowly purified by the power of purification. How could the power of purification be so gentle and miraculous? Enlin carefully sensed his own body, and only then did he discover that the power of purification had purposely split itself into another type of power to protect his organs and meridians, thereby protecting his internal organs and meridians from the shock waves from the clash of the two powers. So it wasn't that little Xie's power of purification itself had this effect. Instead, she was trying to protect him with all her might. Soon, the power of death that had plunged Enlin into dire straits was purified by the evil-slaying sword, and the evil-slaying sword returned to its original black color. Enlin was a little dazed as he sensed the power of death within his body completely vanish. The evil-slaying sword was truly extraordinary. After the power of death was cleansed, Enlin immediately activated his new 5 elemental powers to quickly repair his body. The pure 5 elemental powers were able to heal even his heart, which had been punctured, at a rate discernible to the naked eye. Little Xie really never disappoints me. Enlin pulled out the evil-slaying sword from his body and looked at it with a loving expression. Little Xie, you're so gentle. The evil-slaying sword shuddered. If you keep being so disgusting, I'll stab you. Enlin nodded with an understanding expression. I understand. You're tough on the outside, but your heart is soft on the inside. F***ck off. Little Xie replied in a concise manner. Enlin had initially planned to have a heart-to-heart talk with Little Xie, but the battle in the distance didn't allow him to waste any time. Tina was about to be overwhelmed by the life goddess attacks. He immediately charged toward the life goddess with his sword in hand. Enlin, sword immortal, was about to reappear. Chapter 23:15. Divine Technique, Flowing Wind Cloud Shadow. A dazzling light burst forth from Tina's body, and she dashed through the air like a flowing cloud. Her movements were graceful and unhurried, but she was actually evading the life goddess attacks by a hair's breadth. Compared to Enlin's several thousand attacks, she had only been struck a few hundred times. Tina had already been struck over 10,000 times, but she had only been struck a dozen or so times, and all of them were minor scratches. Humph! What an annoying bug! The life goddess' intricate features darkened even further, and the jade hairpin's attacks became more and more powerful. You're only going to die a few minutes later than Enlin. What's the point? The life goddess mocked as she attacked. She still held the absolute upper hand, and Tina didn't even have a chance to retaliate. This was the exact same battle as when she had battled Enlin. At the very most, this little fairy was more agile, and she was able to evade the jade hairpin with greater accuracy. Aside from that, there was nothing special about her. Giant Enlin won't die. Tina was the one who had been told that it didn't matter, but she immediately retorted at the mention of Enlin. The life goddess laughed heartily. He won't die? Looking at the time, his vitality should have been completely sapped by the power of death already. How about I give you some time to collect his body? What she said was completely different from what she was doing. She manipulated the multicolored jade hairpin even more fiercely, as if she wanted to beat Tina to death. Right at this moment, an enraged roar suddenly erupted from the distance. Eat this, you sly wretch! Enlin's voice was like a thunderous bell as his sword fell mercilessly toward the life goddess. The life goddess had been focusing all of her attention on Tina, and she didn't think that a terrifying sword intent would suddenly approach her. She turned around in a panic, only to discover that Enlin had snuck up to her, and her face turned pale with fright. It's you. How could this be? Her voice didn't even get a chance to finish her sentence before her sword fell. Sword of the heavenly Tao. It was as if heaven and earth had been created. Golden light pierced through the heavens. The paramount sword Tao soared into the heavens, destroying all things. boundless sword intent began to tear into the heavenly life god's body. The paramount heaven-crushing techniques were unleashed to the fullest by Enlin, and both the heavens and the earth were punctured into a boundless hole by the golden sword projection. The heavenly life god's three paramount powers of life, sky, and sea all activated to form layers of barriers as the power of the heavens surged forth like a tsunami. However, all the hasty defenses were torn apart by the extremely powerful and shocking sword light that could slash through everything, successfully tearing open a gap. The sword chi pierced through her body and tore apart her clothes, leaving behind an extremely horrifying bloody wound on her pure white and tender skin, and it even crushed her internal organs. The heavenly life goddess threw up a mouthful of blood and flew through the air. "Tina!" Enlin yelled after exhausting all his energy. Tina had already made her move. An astonishing power erupted from her petite body, and she appeared before the heavenly life god in the blink of an eye before unleashing over 100 sword strikes with her divine mirror world sword, riddling over 100 holes into the heavenly life god's body. Ah! The heavenly life god howled with agony as divine mirror particles began to appear within all of the wounds on her body. An extremely pure and terrifying crimson power of death suddenly erupted from her body, and only then was she able to force back Tina and Enlin, who were still trying to land the killing blow. Enlin panted heavily as he looked at the severely wounded heavenly life god, and a sense of elation welled up in his heart. Tina's attacks had already inflicted lethal wounds on the heavenly life god. After over 100 accurate sword strikes, the divine mirror particles had already infiltrated every single part of her body, and cutting her would not be able to solve the problem. The heavenly life god was finally going to experience what it was like to be constantly corroded by death. Enlin could see the crimson power of death enshrouding the heavenly life god's body, and she was struggling and wailing with anguish, as if she were in a lot of pain. Tina turned to Enlin with an elated smile. "Giant Enlin, I knew you'd be fine. It's all thanks to little Sia." Enlin nodded with a smile. How dare this woman hurt you so badly? I'm going to teach her a lesson now." Tina was still glaring at the heavenly life god with an enraged expression as the divine mirror world sword in her hand continued to radiate a translucent light. "This heavenly life god is dead for sure. My divine mirror particles are constantly corroding her body, so there's no cure for her unless she dies." Tina was not nervous in the slightest upon seeing the heavenly life god trying to use her paramount power to eradicate the divine mirror particles. Enlin sighed with emotion. The heavenly life god's relentless attempts to eradicate the divine mirror particles within her body were very similar to his. All causes must have consequences. As long as there's me, there's you. Before everything was over, all sorts of karma could take place. With this in mind, Enlin was unable to repress his urge to land the killing blow. Right at this moment, the rich power of death began to corrode the heavenly life god's body of its own accord. The heavenly life god's flesh and bones were melted right before Enlin and Tina's astonished eyes. In the end, everything about her was melted away. Did she commit suicide because she couldn't stand the pain? This was Enlin's first reaction. After all, the heavenly life god had screamed in agony. However, in the next instant, he shook his head and denied this guess. Normal cultivators might be able to do this, but their enemy was the paramount heavenly life god. She's using the power of death to kill herself. Could it be rebirth from death? Enlin's eyes suddenly focused as he activated his divine simulation technique. He then charged toward a certain direction without any hesitation before stabbing his evil-slaying sword through the air. 6 strikes of the war god, Shadow Tiger. The evil-slaying sword pierced through the air at an extremely fast speed, leaving a series of afterimages in its wake. However, a dark red power of death suddenly exploded in the air. Enlin's sword was impeded by an extremely powerful force, and his body was blasted flying as if it had been struck by a massive hammer. At this moment, An exquisitely beautiful woman in a flowery dress strode out from within the power of death. She didn't look at Lin. Instead, she turned her cold gaze toward the little fairy. Seeing as I can't get out of this alive, why don't I just die once before coming back to life? She could come back to life at will and die at will. The paramount heavenly gods who controlled life and death were just that willful. And Lin's eyes narrowed slightly as he continued to maintain his divine simulation technique. He could sense that even though the heavenly life god had been resurrected, her essence had actually been damaged. Not only that, but the stability of the three-phase true heavenly reincarnation formation was also beginning to wane. It was clear that she had paid a heavy price. The heavenly life god then turned toward Lin. I'm very surprised that you were able to deal with my power of death. However, I won't let this happen again. I won't give you any more time or opportunity to deal with it. Chapter 23:16. The life force field around the heavenly life goddess became more and more abundant. The earth within a radius of over 5,000 kilometers had clearly been ravaged by the flames of battle, but now lush greenery and even adorable little beasts had appeared. This was only the transformation that the heavenly life goddess's aura had created in just a few seconds. It was easy to imagine just how rich her life force was. A colorful jade hairpin returned to the life goddess again. The 9-colored divine light flowed slowly like colorful silk, lingering around the life goddess's body, reflecting her unparalleled beauty. The jade hairpin was no longer as murderous as before. Instead, it had become more and more natural, and it looked very comfortable and harmless. And Lin's expression became even more grave upon seeing this. He naturally didn't believe that this was a sign that the heavenly life goddess had given up on killing him. The lethal power of death was definitely still contained within the jade hairpin. The life goddess turned from a sharp-edged swordsman into a seemingly harmless assassin in beautiful clothes, but she was in fact a cunning assassin. That was all. The heavenly life goddess power of death was indeed terrifying, but it had its limits. At the very least, Lin discovered from his previous battles that the lethal power of death could only be triggered by inflicting lethal wounds on oneself. Normal superficial wounds or normal injuries would not be able to be triggered. This was further evidenced by the fact that Tina had sustained so many injuries, but had not been tainted by the power of death. The heavenly life goddess's colorful jade hairpin slowly flew into the sky. She suddenly spread open her arms, and green divine light surged through heaven and earth again. The area encompassed by her peerlessly powerful life force field expanded by over 100 times. The entire area within a radius of over 1,000,000 kilometers was enshrouded within the heavenly life goddess's life force field. Countless phenomena suddenly appeared behind the heavenly life goddess. Even Lin, who had already reached the pinnacle of his cultivation base, was struck by a sense of dizziness and disorientation upon seeing this. At this moment, a clear and divine voice erupted throughout the entire world, as if it were a decree from the heavens. Sun, moon, and stars, time and space. Life creation, transform heaven and earth. The heavenly life goddess voice trailed off. Boom. An earth-shattering boom erupted. The world before Lin's eyes changed. One divine tree after another over 100,000 feet tall rose from the ground. The phoenix soars in the sky, the flood dragon crouches in the pond. Unimaginable celestial and divine mountains that were tens of thousands of feet tall, even hundreds of thousands of feet tall, appeared in their vision, as if they were primordial realms that were hard to reach. A towering mountain giant with a mace on its back roamed the mountains. Numerous rocks that were tens of thousands of meters in length flashed through the sky. Everywhere they passed, gales surged into the sky while green waves rippled through the forest, and their impetus was extremely vast. The great desolate age beasts with powerful auras in the forest raised their heads, looking around with cold and dangerous eyes. Sometimes, flames would come out of their mouths or their heads would shine with divine light, indicating that this was their territory. In the clouds, Koinsu transformed into a deep and ethereal shadow. Occasionally, he would reveal half of his continent-sized body and look down at the world with his moon-like eyes. Enlin looked at the spectacular scene in front of him and sensed the real-life aura. The shock in his heart could not be any greater. In particular, when all of the terrifying monsters turned their gazes toward Enlin and Tina at the same time, a sense of oppression and suffocation washed over them like a tidal wave. What kind of world was this? Most importantly, this world did not exist on its own. Instead, the life goddess had perfectly integrated everything that she had created into this Tai Chu continent. This meant that Enlin was still on the Tai Chu continent. But a bunch of these things had suddenly appeared on the Tai Chu continent. Enlin was astonished by the power of creation that he had just unleashed. The entire world within a radius of several million kilometers had been transformed. All of a sudden, a monster with a lion's body and a dragon's head glowing with divine light opened its cavernous mouth within the divine tree forest. Roar! A scorching pillar of Tao flames pierced through the heavens. Enlin slashed his sword through the air, slicing the pillar of energy in half. A gust of wind suddenly swept past. Enlin raised his head to discover that a gargantuan bird had already appeared before him, and its golden claws were like sharp blades slicing through the air toward him. Bam! Enlin drew back his sword to defend himself, and a boundless force forced him toward the ground. Break through! Enlin focused his gaze, and an extremely sharp light erupted from his sword blade, slicing through the massive bird's golden claws before slicing the massive bird in half. A shrill cry erupted as the bird plummeted from the sky. Enlin had thought that he had taken care of one of them, but to his surprise, the two halves of the bird's body fused back together under the effect of the peculiar life force field. Howl! Enlin let loose an anguished cry. The bird spread its wings and circled in the air before flying toward Enlin again. It was alive and kicking again. What a troublesome power! Enlin grimaced. At this moment, two WYRMs over 100,000 feet in length circled around in the air before also diving down toward Enlin. One of the WRMs stomped on massive waves, while the other WRMs unleashed lightning from its mouth, and its claws were capable of controlling violent winds. At the same time, Tina was also engaged by a few mountain giants and forest beasts. It's this group of beasts again. Does the heavenly life god really like to summon underlings to attack me? Enlin shook his head. The two WYRMs converged on him from both sides, but Enlin's evil sword technique, Black Moon Slash, sliced them into several segments. After being able to unleash the final technique of the 6 strikes of the war god, his sword techniques had reached the essential great Tao, and he could be considered as the #1 sword technique in the kingdom of the 9 state. These WYRMs were only able to intimidate normal gods of creation, so there was really nothing for him to be afraid of. However, this resurrection ability is a little troublesome to deal with. Enlin slashed his sword toward the Daping bird, who was flying toward him again after being resurrected. All of a sudden, a chill ran down his spine. A streak of colorful light pierced through space. In the blink of an eye, it traversed countless spaces soundlessly, as if it was an attack from another dimension. There was no way to defend against it, and there was no way to dodge it. In that instant, Enlin realized that the powerful mythological beast attack was all fake. It was merely a tool to distract him and distract him. This was a true killing technique. It was still the heavenly life god herself. He was unable to evade the attack of the colorful jade hairpin. Enlin's 5 elemental ring revolved frantically, and he shifted his position in the nick of time. The jade hairpin pierced through the flesh outside of his heart, upon which blood splattered through the air. As long as the jade hairpin wasn't fatally wounded, he could still fight. In the distance, the heavenly life goddess expression darkened slightly. I can still evade it? A determined expression appeared on her face as she made a divine seal, which surged through the entire world. Several dozen primordial beasts instantly locked their eyes onto Enlin as cruel smiles appeared on their faces. A few massive beasts won't be enough to deal with you. Then how about a few dozen? Chapter 23:17. Deafening roars reverberated throughout this peculiar world. Over 60 primordial beasts had their auras locked onto Enlin's body. Even in this terrifying world created by the heavenly life goddess, this was more than half of them. Enlin's flesh instantly crawled. Any one of these primordial beasts was powerful enough to dominate an entire realm. Even so, Enlin wasn't afraid of them. He could just kill them one by one. However, in this realm created by the goddess of life, all of them had the ability to revive infinitely. If things continued like this, even if he didn't get stabbed to death by the jade hairpin, he would at least die of exhaustion. Enlin and Tina exchanged a glance at this moment. They charged toward the goddess of life at the same time. Slaying the goddess of life was the key to this battle. A battle that shook the entire Tai Chu continent erupted. On the White Nectar Sea, Flowing Gold looked at the forest that extended all the way to the White Nectar Sea, and he clicked his tongue in astonishment. Oi KK! This is way too much. Does the heavenly life god only have that many underlings? Not long ago, there were only 10 primordial beasts that were comparable to gods of creation. Now, there are close to 100 primordial beasts that are comparable to gods of creation? Even if these primordial beasts aren't as powerful as the 10 primordial beasts, they have an unlimited lifespan and can revive infinitely. Just thinking about it makes my flesh crawl. Flowing Gold wasn't the only one who was astonished. Even gods of creation like Nuwa and Patriarch Zhu Yin were extremely astonished. They had clearly underestimated the power of the goddess of life. Meanwhile, in the northern region of the White Nectar Sea, the heavenly immortal being seemed to have seen a glimmer of hope at the sight of the heavenly life goddess power of creation, and he yelled, "Long live the goddess of life," as he swung his heavenly sword relentlessly toward the heavenly light executioner sword. Even though the heavenly light executioner sword was extremely powerful, it was still being forced back by the heavenly light executioner sword. Gabriel, do we have to use the final song of the destroyer of heaven and earth? Zhan Xiong Wu Zun couldn't help but ask with difficulty after being suppressed by the immortal celestial being's attacks again and again. Gabriel continued to pour his life energy into the formation. As he watched the enemy's attacks become more and more powerful, and as he watched more and more heaven-crushing army soldiers being killed by the power of the heavens, he knew that they wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. The radiant punishing heaven sword was already on its 8th song, but it still couldn't defeat the immortal celestial being. If they used the final song, they would indeed be able to increase their chances of victory. However, that would require a large amount of blood essence and lives from the heaven-crushing army. Even though the heaven-crushing United Army had already signed a life and death contract, they were willing to sacrifice themselves for the Tai Chu continent. But was he really going to use it here? Gabriel felt very indignant. The 9th song was the formation's limit. It required all of the heaven-crushing army's blood essence to be burned, and over 20 million beings would die from being unable to withstand the immense burden. She did not want these comrades to make such a huge sacrifice. Be careful! Dipankara Buddha suddenly pushed with one hand. A golden Buddhist seal appeared on the side of the Radiant's exterminating sword, blocking Immortal Celestial's violent attack. However, the sword was already shaking violently. At this time, Celestial Immortal had already arrived on the White Nectar Sea. He waved his arms, and the power of the heavens erupted, wrapping around the Radiant's executioner sword. Today I will tear this sword apart. Heavenly Goddess Wu Yin's 9 divine halos had already appeared on her harp, upon which an unprecedented light erupted forth. Celestial Immortal's power reached its pinnacle at this moment, and his god of creation's stage aura swept toward the massive sword. She had nothing left to lose. Her only goal was to sacrifice all of these enemies to the heavenly Tao. Celestial Immortal's hand reached toward the Radiant's executioner sword. At this moment, a line of blood had already appeared on Gabriel's forehead, and a determined expression appeared on her face. Right at this moment, a golden-banded staff descended from the sky before crashing viciously into Celestial Immortal's arm. Boom! Celestial Immortal's arm was bent. When the other hand moved forward, demonic flames suddenly rose up in front of it. Demon Emperor Cu's fist had already landed on Celestial Immortal's arm, upon which it exploded violently. Even Celestial Immortal was forced to take a step back. At this moment, Demon Lord Ling Gu transformed into a demonic god over 100,000 feet tall, and he unleashed a series of demonic fists towards Celestial Immortal's back. Mi Jialai's holy light and Yun Menjiang's assassination also arrived at this moment. The sudden bombardment of magical techniques caused the immortal celestial being to stop in his tracks. Great, the heroes who destroyed the West Sea skyship are back. Long live the heaven-crushing sect. Victory to the gods of destruction. The heaven-crushing army was extremely excited to see Demon Emperor Cu and the others appear. They didn't expect that the big shots who had destroyed the West Sea skyship still had the strength to fight. The heaven-crushing army was indeed prepared to sacrifice themselves, but that didn't mean they didn't want to live. The arrival of Demon Lord Ling Gu had ignited their hopes of victory, as well as their hopes of survival. This was the dawn of hope. The radiant heaven-exterminating sword stabilized its sword form and erupted with a myriad of sword chi. It followed closely behind the sword master and furiously slashed toward the celestial before it. For a moment, the sword light was like the sea, and the sword chi filled the sky. Celestial Immortality's defenses were torn apart by the Radiant's punishing heaven swords, leaving behind sword wounds that were hundreds of meters long. One celestial after another fell. How is this possible? How do they still have so much power? Heavenly Goddess Wu Yin's expression shifted drastically. With the addition of Demon Emperor Cu, Yun Menjiang, and the battling Buddha, the advantage that Celestial Immortality had built up was instantly shattered. Celestial Immortality was once again the one on the receiving end. Could it be that I've sacrificed my life only to be beaten up? Heavenly Goddess Wu Yin suddenly felt a little sad. Heavenly Goddess Lan Yu was just as sad as she was. She had unleashed her 9th divine halo with the intention of targeting Shangguani, but she was now being bashed to the ground by Lan Xiaoni, and the Dark Wing Emperor. Heavenly Goddess Lan Yu was forced into retreat by the Dark Wing Emperor's darkness once again. Divine Water Feather Spear. Lan Xiaoni descended from the sky, and boundless golden divine water took advantage of this opportunity to envelop Lan Yu's body. Heavenly Goddess Lan Yu couldn't accept this kind of humiliation, and she immediately unleashed her divine halo to tear apart the golden water around her body. However, at this moment, a dark blue spear had already fallen from the sky. Heavenly Goddess Lan Yu didn't even think before slashing a sword projection toward the sky. She wasn't trying to destroy the spear, but rather, she was trying to change the trajectory of the spear. However, to her surprise, a pair of water wings suddenly sprouted from the dark blue spear, allowing it to evade Heavenly Goddess Lan Yu's sword strike. What? This spear can move on its own? It can evade my attack? Heavenly Goddess Lan Yu's expression faltered. At this moment, the dark blue spear had already made a large turn, and it pierced into Heavenly Goddess Lan Yu's body right before her astonished eyes. Chapter 23:18. At this moment, Heavenly Goddess Lan Yu finally understood what the Heavenly Water Feather Spear meant. The heavenly water condensed and descended like a feather, making it difficult to trace. This was the true Tao realm of the Heavenly Water Feather Spear. Heavenly Goddess Lan Yu's sword technique was extremely fast, but it was unable to strike the Heavenly Water Feather Spear. Instead, the Heavenly Water Feather Spear pierced through her body. This technique that Lan Xiaoni had unleashed had reached an extremely terrifying level of mastery over water. The heavenly water feather spear tore a huge hole into heavenly goddess Lan Ya's body. Not only that, but the power of water imbued within the spear was also fusing with her blood in an attempt to completely destroy her life force. You want to kill me? Dream on. The power of light suddenly erupted from heavenly goddess Lan Ya's body, dispelling Lan Xiaoni's power of water. A long sword filled with boundless light and hope was pulled out from the void. Lan Xiaoni's expression shifted slightly, and she tried to evade with her fishtail. However, heavenly goddess Lan Ya was not going to give her an opportunity to evade, and she immediately slashed her sword toward the mermaid. Heavenly God Technique, Heaven and Earth Sword of Creation, Origin. An earth-shattering sword, intent soared into the sky. The powerful power of light illuminated the white nectar sea as if it were daytime. Right at this moment, a pair of black wings appeared in their field of vision. Ha ha! I've always wanted to see whether the darkness bestowed upon me by the heavenly leader is stronger than your light. Pure darkness erupted from the Dark Wing Emperor's hand. Dark Wing Tribe Ordinary Slash of Darkness. The Dark Wing Emperor purposely named this technique in a very ordinary manner. That way, if he defeated heavenly goddess Lan Ya, he would be able to show how bad *SS his tribe was. A sword arc of pure darkness that seemed to be able to engulf everything in this world was pulled out from the void by the Dark Wing Emperor, and it crashed down toward the earth-shattering sword strike. In that instant, darkness and light collided, and they began to fuse and devour each other. The Dark Wing Emperor stood proudly in the sky with a calm expression. The power of darkness was bestowed upon him by Enlin, and it was a consumable. The Dark Wing Emperor had already unleashed all of the power of darkness that Enlin had bestowed upon him, so this was his final technique. Success or failure depended on this move. Don't be fooled by how calm he looked right now. In fact, he was still panicking deep down. However, he couldn't show it. It was a moment of heroism. Even if he died, he had to die with vigor. What the Dark Wing Emperor hadn't expected was that Enlin's power of darkness was so powerful that after clashing with the light for a period of time, it began to devour the light like a bottomless pit. The energy that had clearly been evenly matched began to pour into the darkness. Even though heavenly goddess Lan Ya gave it her all and unleashed her most powerful light sword technique with all her might, the light sword technique, which was imbued with boundless hope, was quickly engulfed before her eyes. In the end it was replaced by despair. Is the darkness really that powerful? I can't accept this, I really can't accept this. Heavenly goddess Lan Ya had an expression of unwillingness on her face. She looked at the power that she detested, which was getting closer and closer, but there was nothing she could do. In the end, her body was swallowed by the darkness and completely disappeared from the world. The darkness quickly dispersed. The Dark Wing Emperor looked at the empty space before him. Even the ocean had been emptied out to form a gargantuan crater. Boundless seawater flowed into the crater to form a waterfall, but the crater did not disappear. The Dark Wing Emperor's eyes lit up. What a wonderful power! I've successfully slain a heavenly god, ha ha ha. He turned to look at the battlefield in the distance and spread open his arms with a fervent and devout expression on his face. Esteemed Heavenly Lord, I have not let you down. I've succeeded. I've slain another heavenly god for the heaven-crushing united army. At this moment, Enlin, who was millions of kilometers away, suddenly sensed something. This feeling. He suddenly turned toward the northern part of the White Nectar Sea. At this moment, the evil-slaying sword in his hand was already trembling violently. Enlin finally understood what the evil-slaying sword was trying to do. Enlin. Power. I need power. I've found a way. Little Xia's excited voice sounded. Looks like great minds think alike. Enlin was also getting excited at the same time. The power in his heart that had been dormant for a long time began to awaken. the darkness, the deepest, and the most powerful energy was injected into the evil-slaying sword in a frenzy, and it was injected with all its might. He wanted nothing more than to transfer all of his power to little Xie. That's enough, I'm too full. I can't eat any more. Little Xie's sword trembled slightly as she spoke with a mixture of discomfort and discomfort. And Lin faltered slightly before continuing to release darkness. I really can't absorb any more. Little Xie grumbled. And Lin released his sword upon hearing this. There was still half of his darkness that he hadn't given to little Xie. It looked like even though little Xie could absorb darkness more easily than even gods of creation, there was still a limit to how much she could absorb. Can you really? And Lin asked. Leave it to me. Little Xie released Lin's hand. At this moment, close to 60 primordial beasts had already pounced toward Lin. Idiot N, take care. Don't die. Haha, don't worry, you have to work hard too. Whoosh! The evil-slaying sword suddenly transformed into a streak of black light before performing spatial skipping at an extremely terrifying speed toward the white nectar sea. The heavenly life goddess could sense what was happening. Even though she didn't know what the evil-slaying sword was trying to do, she just had to stop it. Hee, are you trying to abandon your master when he's in danger? To think that you would dare to commit such an ungrateful and treacherous act. Stop right there. The heavenly life goddess unleashed an enraged roar toward the fleeing evil-slaying sword. Multiple spatial barriers instantly appeared in front of the evil-slaying sword. Divine technique, boundless mirror. Tina stood atop her primordial golden crow before slashing her sword toward the evil-slaying sword. The sword instantly pierced through space, and a circular mirror appeared in front of the spatial barriers. The evil-slaying sword immediately pierced into the mirror. The evil-slaying sword then appeared in the sky over 50,000 kilometers away before continuing to fly into the distance. Damn it! The heavenly life goddess expression darkened upon seeing that she had failed to stop it. So what if a sword spirit got away? All of you will die. The heavenly life goddess issued a command, and all of the primordial beasts within the creation realm sprang into action to attack Lin and Tina. Meanwhile, in the northern region of the White Nectar Sea, the Dark Wing Emperor was expressing his emotions to Lin with excitement. All of a sudden, a sword appeared in the air, exuding an extremely familiar energy aura. Right at this moment, countless black lines spread through the sky like a gargantuan net, as if they were trying to capture something. Vanquish the heavens and slay all evil. Final Tao. A burst of invisible power flowed along the black line and into the blade of the sword. Then, through the connection between the pinnacle divine weapon and its master, the power of Tao quickly converged toward Lin before fusing together over 1,000,000 kilometers away. Lin took a deep breath, and a blush appeared on his face as he sensed the increasingly powerful Tao power. Awesome! Chapter 23:19. WH. What's going on with Lin? The heavenly life goddess' pupils contracted slightly. She discovered that Lin was quickly recovering, and he was becoming more powerful. Without the evil-slaying sword, Lin was currently battling the primordial beasts with his bare hands, but his aura was becoming more and more powerful, and there was an expression of contentment on his face. The heavenly life god was a top-rate being who had activated her true form of Tao, so she was able to quickly detect that something was different. There was an ethereal and paramount power of Tao between heaven and earth that was surging relentlessly into Lin's body and fusing as one with his Tao. How could this be? Could it be that the heavenly Tao is helping him? The heavenly life goddess was astonished. No. This is forcefully fusing with him. Could it be that sword? The heavenly life goddess turned toward the northern region of the White Nectar Sea, and her eyes became as clear as the sky as she activated her heavenly eye. Then, she saw the black sword run over to the immortal celestial being's battlefield. It was releasing strange black Tao incarnations that were madly absorbing the Tao energy that was spilling out of the world, This sword is a demon. To think that it can do something like this. The heavenly life goddess was a little astonished upon seeing this. That's right, the evil-slaying sword was absorbing the Tao energy of heavenly goddess Lan Ya after her death. Enlin coincidentally discovered that when he bestowed the power of darkness upon others, they would use his power to kill heavenly gods, thereby allowing him to absorb the Tao energy of the heavenly gods. The Dark Wing Emperor had opened the door to a new world for him. Thus, a bold idea began to form in Enlin's mind. The evil-slaying sword was the one who had carried out this bold idea. Little Xie immediately rushed to the scene to collect the corpse. Enlin successfully obtained heavenly goddess Lan Ya's Tao energy through Lan Ya, thereby further enhancing his own power. This wasn't just an enhancement in his divine Tao of darkness, it was also an enhancement in all aspects of his body. It was exactly because of this that he became more and more powerful as he battled against over 60 primordial beasts. He can absorb Tao energy to become infinitely more powerful. The heavenly life goddess withdrew her heavenly eye, and a fierce expression appeared on her face. With such potential, Enlin cannot be allowed to live. Just as the heavenly life goddess was determined to kill Enlin first. In the White Jade Sea, the uninvited black sword attracted the attention of almost all living beings. It couldn't be helped. The moment he came up, he released a bunch of mysterious black lines that were surging with extremely profound and powerful sword intent. It was hard not to be noticed. Very quickly, a powerful being from the heaven-crushing sect recognized this sword. This sword, isn't it Enlin God's sword? Hiss. It's true. What was it doing here instead of fighting alongside Enlin? Could it be that he's here to help us? But we're doing well now and we don't need help. Isn't the battle over there the most important thing? Some of the powerful beings of the heaven-crushing United Army were already engaged in a heated discussion. They were extremely excited, but they were also quite perplexed by the appearance of the evil-slaying sword. The Heavenly Human Tribe United Army was on their guard. Not only was Enlin a well-known figure in the Heavenly Human Tribe, but even Enlin's sword was like a devil incarnate to the heavenly humans. Right at this moment, a black light flashed from the evil-slaying sword. A petite little girl with a round, chubby face, wearing a small black dress, with her fair and tender calves glowing with a white luster outside the dress, materialized in front of everyone's eyes. She held the evil-slaying sword in her hand as she stared at the celestial immortal being with her dead fish eyes. All of the living beings present, regardless of whether they were normal cultivators or powerful beings, the same thought appeared in their minds at the sight of the little girl. So adorable! A second thought then appeared in their minds. They really wanted to touch and rub her. In the next instant, an extremely terrifying sword intent swept through heaven and earth, striking all living beings with a sense of asphyxiation. Darkness spread from beneath the little girl's feet, and a pair of wings constructed from darkness spread open, sucking in all the energy between heaven and earth, as if they could engulf everything. The adorable little girl had instantly transformed into the Queen of Darkness. All of the living beings present fell silent. Darkness. This is the purest form of darkness. This is darkness that is many times more powerful than the darkness bestowed upon me by the Heavenly Lord. The Dark Wing Emperor was beside himself with excitement at the sight of the darkness spreading from beneath Little Xie's feet. Little Xie stood proudly in the heavens with evil-slaying sword in her hand. Darkness accompanied her, and her unyielding and domineering aura struck all of the living beings present with immense pressure. She's the evil-slaying sword's sword spirit? How is she able to use this power of darkness? Can a sword spirit do this? This is the power of the paramount heavenly god of darkness. Why did Brother Enlin send her here? Does that even need to be said? It looks like she's here to fight. Using the sword to receive its master's power? Making the sword fight on its own? Why doesn't my sword spirit have this ability? She's probably a fake sword spirit. Just as the heaven-crushing sect united army was discussing spiritedly again, little Xie also spoke. She pointed her sword at the immortal celestial being, and her childish voice was filled with indifference and arrogance. All of you heavenly gods here are my prey. I'm going to start harvesting now. Everyone erupted into an uproar upon hearing this. The Devas, in particular, were already enraged. How dare you? You actually dare to set your sights on our God of heaven? You're just a sword spirit. Do you really think we're afraid of you? Kill, kill, kill. Kill that overconfident sword spirit. Pure white heaven energy burst out from the immortal god's body. He wielded 2 heaven swords that were tens of thousands of feet long. With a light wave, he could split the sky and the sea. A god of creation stage aura locked firmly onto little Xie's body. If it was any other expert, they might be intimidated by this aura. However, little Xie's chubby face remained expressionless, but the darkness emanating from her evil-slaying sword had become even denser. All of the heaven-crushing united army soldiers faltered slightly upon hearing little Xie's words. Then, all of them began to yell with excitement. As expected of the #1 war god of the Tai Chu continent, Unlin is so domineering even as a sword spirit. Let's slay the heavenly gods with the evil-slaying sword spirit. Just as the heaven-crushing army was getting excited, little Xie had already sprung into action, and her body was as fast as a black streak of light. Quick! Stop her! The immortal celestial being quickly sprang into action, and the heaven sword in his hand slashed down upon the petite little girl with boundless sword might. A pure white sword projection pierced through heaven and earth, slicing through the sea with terrifying might. Little Xie didn't take evasive measures. Instead, she unleashed a sword strike toward the immortal celestial being. Darkness began to appear along the blade of the sword. This was the purest darkness, and heaven and earth were instantly plunged into a realm of absolute darkness. Right before the immortal celestial being's astonished eyes, the darkness engulfed the sword projection before descending upon him like a crescent moon and slicing him in half. Chapter 23:20. The immortal celestial being had never imagined that this adorable little girl would act so decisively, or that her strength would be so terrifying. With a single move, she had broken through its attack and even cut its body. Quick! Hurry up and recover! The heavenly liquid god screamed in horror. The pure and holy light flickered. The immortal celestial being, which had been sliced apart, once again returned to his unscathed state. The reason why the immortal celestial being was called the immortal celestial being was because its existence was near undying. It was a perfect undying body. Little Xie's expression darkened upon seeing this, and she began to swing her sword through the air again. The heavenly human tribe united army felt a chill run down their spines at the sight of the darkness before them, and they unleashed their most powerful heavenly power with all their might. Deva Holy Strike, Cross Light Slash. Immortal Celestial crossed his 2 swords, forming a cross-shaped sword chi that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Little Xie drew back her sword with one hand, and her other hand swept past the inky black blade. Countless sword inscriptions appeared on the blade of the sword, and the tip of the sword was aimed directly at the celestial immortal's head. Vanquish the heavens and slay all evil, darkness annihilation. Little Xie's evil-slaying sword abruptly stabbed forward, and darkness imbued with her most powerful sword technique transformed into a devastating sword strike. Bam! The cross-light slash was devoured by the darkness, leaving behind a huge hole. Immediately afterward, the immortal celestial being's head was obliterated. At the same time, millions of heavenly human tribe powerhouses disappeared as well. The only one still alive was heavenly goddess Silent Sound, who was controlling the immortal celestial being. However, the harp she had used to control the immortal celestial being had already caved in and cracked. The strings were all broken, and there was still darkness burning on it like fire, releasing a terrifying devouring power, It was the harp in her arms that blocked that fatal blow for her. Silence, deathly silence. Both the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army and the Heaven-Crushing Army were dumbstruck. What left the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army dumbstruck was that their most powerful attack had been nullified in an instant. Not only that, but their heads had also been instantly blasted apart. The Heaven-Crushing Army was dumbstruck. They had just said that they were going to help the Sword Spirit, but before they could do anything, the Sword Spirit had exploded Immortal Celestial Being's head. What kind of speed was that? He originally thought that the Sword Spirit's strength was at the Genesis tier at most, and that it would be a world-shaking battle with the Immortal Celestial Being. Who would have thought that the Sword Spirit would instantly kill the Immortal Celestial Being? This wasn't a Sword Spirit. It felt more like a living paramount heavenly god of darkness. The Dark Wing Emperor had just flexed, and he was extremely envious of little Xie. However, he knew the difference between a tool and a caring little girl, so he didn't feel like it was unfair. The heavenly humans were just about to recover their heads. Little Xie's body disappeared on the spot. In the next instant, the inky black evil-slaying sword pierced through the harp and into Heavenly Goddess Silent Sound's chest. I told you, all of you heavenly gods are my prey. You're the first. Little Xie held evil-slaying in her hand as she spoke to Heavenly Goddess Silent Sound. Vanquish the heavens and vanquish all evil, end of the Tao. Black patterns spread out in the void like a spider web. Each pattern was a Tao that led directly to the source. There were tens of thousands of Tao on them, and there was boundless darkness. A series of black patterns enshrouded Heavenly Goddess Silent Sound. Heavenly Goddess Silent Sound didn't say anything. She merely heaved a forlorn sigh before her body was engulfed by the black patterns. The evil-slaying sword also fell at this moment within the creation realm outside the White Nectar Sea. The power of the 5 elements revolved around Enlin's body, and he was able to unleash the power of the 5 elements to the maximum with each and every one of his attacks. In the face of the oncoming primordial beasts, he basically killed one with each punch. The primordial bird was punched, and it plummeted to the ground like a useless chicken. The 10-tailed primordial demon emperor was punched, and its body transformed into a ball before crashing through a few divine mountains. There was also a wind-lightning heavenly wolf that opened its mouth to swallow Enlin, only to have its head exploded with a single kick from Enlin, upon which it died an extremely gruesome death. Enlin's invincible combat prowess made it very difficult for the primordial beasts to attack him. However, the primordial beasts were unable to do anything to Enlin in a short time, and Enlin was also unable to do anything to the Heavenly Life God. He couldn't even approach the Heavenly Life God. Humph, you're wasting your power like this. You'll die when you run out of power. The Heavenly Life God knew that Enlin wouldn't be able to last much longer in his current state, and she chuckled coldly. As they spoke, Enlin blasted 3 more primordial beasts into smithereens. However, the Heavenly Life God then used her power of life and death to easily revive another 4 primordial beasts. She was not flustered in the slightest in the face of Enlin and Tina's combined attacks. In fact, she felt like Enlin's relentless struggle and gradual loss of power in the face of her immense power was very pleasing to her. How much power do you have left in your body? How much longer can you last? A smile appeared on the Life Goddess' face, and her long, slender fingers continued to twirl as the colorful jade hairpin struck Enlin from time to time. Even though Enlin was able to evade all of her attacks, it was still a very satisfying sight to see Enlin being stabbed by the jade hairpin even though he was struggling to evade her attacks. Stop playing around, Life God. Can you take care of him quickly? He's a very sinister man. The Heavenly Sea God couldn't bear to watch this any longer. The Heavenly Life God's expression darkened slightly. Do I need you to tell me what to do? It wasn't that she didn't want to take care of Enlin as quickly as possible. The problem was that the circumstances didn't allow her to do so. Her most powerful techniques were her control over life and death, as well as the power of creation. The jade hairpin was her most powerful technique. Of course, the close to 100 primordial beast underlings were also one of her most powerful techniques. Any other god of creation would have been insta-killed a long time ago, but Enlin was still struggling, so what could she do? However, he was still struggling. Enlin was going to die sooner or later, and she couldn't think of any way for Enlin to turn the tables. I can sense that his aura has already receded. Is he starting to tire? The heavenly life goddess lips curled up slightly. Victory was right before her eyes, and she was going to take it one step at a time. However, right at this moment, Enlin's body shuddered as his aura, which was gradually receding, suddenly soared explosively once again. A faint blush appeared on Enlin's face, and a sense of satisfaction welled up in his heart. Even his overall strength had increased significantly. What's going on? Enlin's lost power has returned? And it's become even more powerful? The heavenly life goddess' eyes widened, and her mind went blank for a short while. Soon, she thought of something. She thought of that strange black sword. Not only was the black sword collecting the power of the deceased heavenly goddess Lanya, but it could also slay heavenly gods of its own volition before continuing to collect the power of the heavenly gods. To Enlin, that sword was a long-range charger. Chapter 23-21. Gasp. That feels good. An intoxicated expression appeared on Enlin's face as he sensed the increasing power of Tao within his body, and he hammered with even more force. The heavenly life goddess gritted her teeth with rage upon seeing this. She had told her not to worry about Enlin, as Enlin would definitely be slowly worn down to death, but look at the result? It had only been a short while, and she had already been given a vicious slap to the face. This was the answer that Enlin had given her. Wear him down to death? No way. Not only can I charge up, but I can also become more powerful. The heavenly life goddess was extremely enraged. The heavenly sea god's flesh crawled. See? This is the result of not taking care of Enlin. He's a monster. He can always turn the tables. His heart sank more and more at the sight of Enlin's ferocious display as he spoke. The heavenly sea god discovered that after witnessing a series of impossible miracles, Enlin had become a shadow in his heart. Even though it appeared that they still held the absolute upper hand, he was still unsure of himself. Enlin became more and more ferocious as the battle progressed. In the face of the massive beasts, he fought like a massive beast and unleashed almost all of the most brutal methods available to him. Using the method of physical combat, he tore apart the bodies of the great desolate beasts. Apart from that, he had also tried roasting the evil dragons, slicing the demonic fish, and cooking the primordial origin lion. Unfortunately, even if those behemoths were cooked in all kinds of dark dishes, the life goddess could still resurrect them. It was completely useless. Enlin didn't care about all of this and continued to unleash his most brutal methods. Even when the colorful jade hairpin tried to assassinate him, he could use a more coquettish posture to avoid the fatal wound that the jade hairpin wanted to inflict. He could even perfectly dodge the jade hairpin's attack. Tina was quite relieved to see how lively Enlin was, and she focused even more on dealing with the massive beasts while trying to find an opportunity to approach the heavenly life goddess. The heavenly life goddess was extremely enraged by the sight of Enlin, and she wanted to join the fray herself. The heavenly sea god cheered her on, but the heavenly heaven god objected vehemently. If you go, you'll only give Enlin an opportunity to get close to you. We're still going to dominate the battlefield, and I refuse to believe that he'll always be this powerful. The heavenly heaven god's eyes narrowed as he spoke in a cold voice. The heavenly life goddess' footsteps faltered, and she clearly agreed with this statement. That was the logic. Seeing Enlin jumping around in front of her, full of energy and vigor, made her angry. She had already used her final trump card. Couldn't this man respect her? At the very least, don't fight a giant beast with a smile. Let's see how long you can keep smiling. The life goddess gritted her teeth as she glared at the man in the distance. Meanwhile, in the northern region of the White Nectar Sea, little Xie had used her final Tao to completely slay heavenly god Wu Yin. The immortal celestial's head would never recover. There was nothing she could do. She had directly killed the leader of the celestial race, so how was the formation supposed to function? Hurry up! Kill! Let's help the evil-slaying sword spirit. Only then did the heaven-crushing army come to their senses and attack in unison. Demon Emperor Siyu, the victorious fighting Buddha, and the other powerful beings also joined in. The immortal celestial was faced with the most terrifying despair. Don't give up. I'll form the head. Heavenly God Dark River suddenly unleashed his 9 divine halos before leaping toward the immortal celestial's empty neck. His combat prowess was already comparable to that of a god of creation, so the immortal celestial might be able to last for a while longer. Little Xie's dead fish eyes lit up slightly at the sight of the heavenly god Dark River charging toward her. It was as if she had seen a fat sheep pouncing toward her. Hold on, everyone! The sword spirit has broken free from Master's control, so the amount of power she can use is extremely limited. She'll be completely exhausted sooner or later. As long as we hold on and survive this most difficult period of time, she won't be able to do anything to us. The heavenly liquid god also gave a rousing analysis. Just as its voice fell, darkness covered the sky and covered the sun. Heavenly God Dark River's blood-curdling cries erupted. Heavenly God Dark River had just flown into the sky to form the head when a chubby little girl stomped on his chest and stabbed a sword into his head, sending him plummeting toward the ocean. Heavenly Liquid God, Heavenly Human Tribe United Army, RIP! Little Xie pulled out her sword and turned toward the Heavenly Liquid God with a smile. You're right. My power is limited, and I can only use it. But do you know just how much power I've stored? With my power, I can kill all of you 10 times over. The little girl's words were very calm, as if she were stating a fact. Right at this moment, Heavenly God Dark River let loose an enraged roar, and unprecedented power erupted from the divine halo above his head, forming a sinister ghost head over 100,000 feet in size that pounced toward little Xie with the power to engulf heaven and earth. You dare to use darkness against me? Little Xie's expression remained unchanged as she raised her evil-slaying sword to retaliate. The sinister ghost over 100,000 feet in size let loose an almighty roar upon seeing the sword projection flying toward it, trying to engulf it with its powerful engulfment ability. Whoosh! In the next instant, the sinister ghost writhed violently before transforming into a formless darkness. Heavenly God Dark River discovered that he had already lost control over the darkness. Not only are you refusing to follow the Heavenly Darkness God, but you're also trying to use the power he bestowed upon you to combat the Heavenly Darkness God's power? What the hell are you thinking? Little Xie pressed her sword against Heavenly God Dark River's neck with a mocking expression. Heavenly God Dark River opened his mouth, but he couldn't find a retort. Yes, what was he thinking? Even after detonating his 9th divine halo, his core power was still darkness. The little girl standing before him possessed the power bestowed upon her by the Heavenly Darkness God, and he was trying to use darkness against her? Wasn't that a joke? After coming to this realization, true despair descended upon him. Little Xie's invincible combat prowess made Heavenly God Dark River unable to see any hope of victory. Just as he thought that he was going to be killed, a series of extremely condensed chains of darkness suddenly bound Heavenly God Dark River's body. This is... Heavenly God Dark River was dumbstruck. Killing him was clearly the best option, so why was Little Xie binding him? Could it be that Little Xie was trying to persuade him to turn back and submit to the Heavenly God of Darkness? How could this be? How could someone as proud as him betray the Heavenly Sea God and side with the Heavenly Darkness God? However, What if the heavenly darkness god had a way to ensure that he wouldn't die even after detonating all 9 of his divine halos? The heavenly darkness goddess was his master, so it wasn't impossible for him to return to his master's embrace, right? Heaven God Dark River's imagination began to run wild as he struggled internally. Little Xie, sword spirit, why didn't you kill him? The battling Buddha suddenly asked. Little Xie knew that the battling Buddha was Enlin's friend, so she replied with a smile, I'm saving this heavenly god for Enlin to recharge. Empyrean God Dark River was dumbstruck upon hearing this. Charge? What charging? Chapter 23-22. Recharge. The battling Buddha was also dumbstruck upon hearing this. Little Xie was in no hurry to kill heavenly god Styx River. Instead, she looked at the heavenly human tribe powerful beings being ravaged by the heaven-crushing united army and explained in a slow voice, That's right, I'm recharging Enlin. I have a very special ability that allows me to absorb the powers of the heavenly gods through a special method before transferring them to Enlin. During this process, not only will Enlin become more powerful, but his energy will also recover quickly. This is what I call recharging, and it will allow Enlin to regain his full power. The battling Buddha was astonished upon hearing this. Heavenly God Styx River was astonished upon hearing this. He could hear the sound of his own heart shattering. Putting down the butcher's knife and returning to his embrace? Now that he thought about it, it was really a joke. Or in other words, reality really was cruel. So in the end, Heavenly God Styx River was just a battery? All of the other powerful beings were astonished upon hearing this, but they also came to a sudden realization. So that's how it is. I was wondering why War God Enlin would send such an important weapon like the evil-slaying sword here to help. So it's to absorb the powers of the heavenly gods. Gasp. It can even absorb the powers of the heavenly gods? This level of divine ability is truly heaven-defying. What are we waiting for? Hurry up and capture the heavenly liquid god. He can also recharge God Enlin. All of the powerful beings were extremely excited. The heavenly liquid god wanted to curse out loud. The battling Buddha was even more excited. Then what are you waiting for, little Xie? Hurry up and absorb heavenly god Styx River to recharge big brother Enlin. Little Xie shook her head. I can't. Even though killing heavenly god Styx River can make Enlin more powerful, Enlin is currently full of power. If we kill heavenly god Styx River, there will be excess power overflowing, which will be a waste, hence, I'll wait for Enlin to expend most of his power before killing him. Heavenly god Styx River's eyes widened. So he didn't even have the right to die now? He had to be kept as a reserve? Humiliation, it was an incomparable humiliation. Ah! Heavenly God Dark River roared with rage as power erupted from his body in an attempt to break free of the chains. However, black light flashed from the chains, and pure darkness engulfed the power that Heaven God Dark River was about to unleash, not giving him a chance to unleash his wrath. At this time, the battle in the distance was nearing its end. The Radiance exterminating Heaven's sword sliced the headless body of the immortal celestial being in half. Yun Menjing, Mi Jiaolai, Devil Lord Linggu, and all the other powerful beings transformed into terrifying beings that reaped the lives of the celestial immortal tribe army. Tens of millions of celestial human tribe soldiers were quickly killed, and the celestial immortal tribe's spell formation began to expand. Lan Xiaoni took the lead and captured the heavenly liquid god with absolute power. Then, she used her extremely powerful power of water to bind the heavenly liquid god. Little Xie, sword spirit, I've also caught a battery. Go charge it for Boss Enlin. Lan Xiaoni carried the heavenly liquid god and flew toward Little Xie before handing it over to Little Xie in a dignified manner. The heavenly liquid god was about to throw up blood from rage. Had the high and mighty heavenly gods been reduced to the point where they had to be described as batteries? Thank you. Little Xie did not hold back and detained the heavenly liquid god. As a safety precaution, she also bound it with several layers of chains of darkness. At this moment, the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army had already been completely wiped out by the Heaven-Crushing United Army. The Heaven-Crushing United Army had finally secured a perfect victory on the immortal celestial being battlefield. All of the living beings on the battlefield began to cheer with joy and tears streaming down their faces. To be able to secure such a complete victory against an extremely powerful enemy was extremely significant to the Heaven-Crushing United Army. It was exactly because of this that their emotions were completely unleashed. Some of them were laughing with glee, some of them had tears streaming down their faces, and some of them were yelling the names of their fallen comrades at the top of their lungs, saying that they had won this battle. Little Xie looked at the expressions of all of the living beings before her. However, it was undoubtedly the case that all of their expressions were filled with joy. Even their eyes were filled with gratitude and respect as they looked at her. Her cold yet chubby face gradually softened. Little Xie shook her head and turned her attention away from them. Instead, she focused her attention on communicating with Enlin. The most important part of this battle was still Enlin's battlefield. The West Sea Sky Arc fell. The immortal celestial being had been destroyed. The Heaven-Crushing United Army had successfully completed their mission. They now had more time and energy to focus on the battlefield in the distance. That was a terrifying battlefield where any random primordial beast could destroy an entire realm. Boom! Space was shattered by Enlin's fist. A terrifying fist projection pierced through space for over 1,500 kilometers. Two primordial beasts wailed with anguish as they were pulverized by Enlin's fist. There was also a 9-colored divine horse that was relatively close to Enlin, and half of its body had been destroyed. It fell to the ground and kicked the air with all 4 of its legs. Almost every single one of the 63 primordial beasts that had attacked Enlin had been brutally slain by Enlin. At the same time, the way they looked at Enlin had also changed. Even though they could resurrect an unlimited number of times, the terrifying pain and memories couldn't be erased. Instead, those memories would seep into their consciousness. A peculiar smile appeared on Enlin's face upon seeing this. Little Xie, I can begin now, a thought was transmitted to a place millions of kilometers away. A faint smile appeared on Little Xie's face as her evil-slaying sword suddenly pierced into the heavenly god's heart. Vanquish the heavens and slay all evil. Final Tao. At the same time, Enlin suddenly sprang into action. He charged toward the heavenly life goddess with all his might. Roar! A primordial flaming lion roared as it pounced toward Enlin. Enlin extended a finger toward the flaming lion. The primordial flaming lion's body shuddered. It was Enlin's finger of the heavenly Tao that had punctured its body from head to toe, and it could still remember the horror of that attack. In the instant that the primordial flaming lion paused, Enlin suddenly retracted his hand. He transformed into a dark shadow and dove headfirst into the flames, piercing through the primordial flaming lion's flames and departing into the distance. The primordial flaming lion had a violent personality and was a top-tier fire-type being. Its weakness was that the closer an enemy was to it, the more difficult it would be to detect the enemy's presence. After Enlin passed by the primordial flaming lion, a crimson primordial WRM appeared before him with a murderous aura surging through heaven and earth. Flames suddenly erupted from Enlin's palm. The primordial WRM shuddered as it recalled the pitiful state it had been in when it was being roasted by Enlin. Enlin took advantage of its momentary daze, and scorching holy flames enshrouded his body as he flew past the primordial WRM like a shooting star. The primordial blood ghost flood dragon was decisive and swift in killing. Weakness. Afraid of fire. Thus, Enlin successfully bypassed the primordial WRM's defenses at an extremely fast speed. Chapter 23:23. What the hell are you two doing? Stop him! The heavenly life goddess was quite alarmed by the sight of Enlin closing in on her. A giant primordial koan with corrosive energy all over its body roared before crashing toward Enlin. Dazzling light suddenly erupted from Enlin's palms. The giant primordial koan's body shuddered violently. It recalled back to how its gargantuan body had been reduced to a paper koan by Enlin's palms. Right at this moment, Enlin had already risen into the air and evaded the giant koan's interception at an extremely fast speed before continuing toward the heavenly life goddess. The corrosive primordial koan possessed extremely terrifying power as well as corrosive and poisonous properties. Its weakness was that it was extremely slow. Enlin didn't need to fight again to evade the giant koan's interception. The heavenly life goddess was a little dumbstruck upon seeing this. Unbeknownst to her, Enlin had already gleaned all of the giant koan beast's weaknesses and characteristics during this period of battle. Gleaning all of the giant koan beast's weaknesses wouldn't help him in slaying them, but it would be very helpful for him to figure out how to evade their interception. Also, why did Enlin have to use such cruel methods to deal with the giant koan beasts in every battle? This wasn't some kind of prank. It was just that he knew that even though the giant koan beasts could resurrect an infinite number of times, there was a certain trauma that he couldn't get rid of. Hence, he had to transform into the most brutal demon and become the target of fear for the giant koan beasts. Thus, when Enlin unleashed his brutal methods to kill them, it would serve as an extremely effective deterrent. This deterrent effect would also be extremely effective in evading the giant koan beast's interception. It could be said that Enlin had been preparing for this moment from the very beginning. He used one peculiar technique after another to evade one powerful giant koan beasts after another as he quickly approached the heavenly life goddess. The heavenly life goddess immediately controlled the jade hairpin to intercept him. Only then did Enlin slow down. After all, each and every one of the jade hairpin's attacks was extremely lethal. At the same time, Tina had already bypassed the prehistoric beasts. She had been hiding her strength from the very beginning. 30 primitive beasts were less than half of the beasts that besieged Enlin. How could they possibly stop her? Seeing that Enlin had finally decided to fight back, she launched a sudden attack on the life goddess. The little fairy had a petite figure, but her movements were extremely agile. She also possessed spatial jumps, medium jumps, and many other powerful and terrifying displacement techniques. The prehistoric beasts were completely unable to stop her. She was also the first to rush to the life goddess. Divine Mirror of Creation, Great Tianyuan Huanyu. Countless layers of mirrors appeared behind Tina. Those mirrors suddenly flew toward the life goddess like flying swords, and some of them fell from the sky like illusionary feathers. Each and every feather seemed to be imbued with a divine mirror world that was imbued with extreme world might. Damn it! The life goddess was unable to ignore Tina's attack, and she clasped her hands together as a boundless realm appeared around her. At the same time, her colorful jade hairpin drew a perfect arc in the air before hurtling toward Tina. Boom, boom, boom. The illusionary feathers crashed into the boundless realm, and it was as if two worlds had collided. A semi-transparent shockwave instantly proliferated for thousands of kilometers, annihilating all divine mountains and divine trees in its path. The resulting boom and explosion was extremely destructive. The illusionary feathers possessed a very special sharpness that was able to penetrate into the boundless realm. The life goddess had no choice but to deal with Tina. At this moment, Enlin had already passed through all of the primitive beasts and completely escaped from their encirclement. At this moment, his connection with little Xie, who was millions of kilometers away, just so happened to be transmitted to Enlin's body, replenishing the energy that he had just expended. At the same time, his power was also significantly increasing. Enlin's aura did not diminish. Instead, it climbed to a new peak. The life goddess' pupils contracted. He's become more powerful again? Never would she have thought that the heavenly gods in the distance would become Enlin's food and enhancers for Enlin to become more powerful. Enlin's aura transformed into golden ripples that proliferated throughout heaven and earth, as he suddenly clenched his fists. A massive 5-elemental totem appeared behind him. The golden 5-elemental ring revolved at an alarming rate. Limit Heavenly Tao, 5-elemental explosion. Lin unleashed an almighty fist toward the life goddess. An extremely terrifying rainbow fist appeared in this world, making everything between heaven and earth pale in comparison. It was as if the fist had replaced the entire world. The heavenly life goddess gritted her teeth and unleashed the power of the heavens and the heavens in a frenzy to set up a defensive barrier around herself. However, her defenses had already been punctured by Tina's great heavenly illusionary feathers, and her perfect realm had already been shattered. Boom! The fist crashed down, and the power of the fist of the heavenly Tao and the new 5-elemental powers were completely unleashed at this moment. A vast expanse of inky black cracks instantly appeared on the life goddess' boundless realm. The great heavenly illusionary feathers that had penetrated deep into the realm were also imbued with an extremely powerful burst of energy, allowing them to puncture through the heavenly life goddess defenses in one fell swoop. No. Ocean heavenly robe. The heavenly life goddess features paled as a blue oceanic membrane materialized around her body. This oceanic membrane was no ordinary defense. Each and every drop of seawater on its surface was materialized from an entire ocean and had transcended space and matter. It could be said that the power of the ocean within it had been condensed to the extreme. Tina's great heavenly illusionary feathers pierced through the boundless realm before landing on the life goddess ocean heavenly robe, only to be engulfed by the seawater. Only the water droplets continued to tremor violently, as if the water droplets were churning violently within the water droplet. The life goddess had kept Tina's attack at bay. However, just as ripples were surging through her body, the boundless realm exploded. The 5-elemental fist, which was powerful enough to pulverize all things in this world, crashed viciously into the ocean heavenly robe. Each and every drop of water represented the might of an ocean. However, the fist was still imbued with the terrifying power of the 5 elements. It then pierced through the ocean heavenly robe before striking the life goddess chest. Bam! A dull thump erupted. A massive hole had been blasted into the life goddess chest. Pfff. Blood gushed forth from her mouth. The terrifying power of the fist flowed through the wound and wreaked havoc within her body. At this moment, the jade hairpin hurtled toward Lin's head. Lin retreated to evade the life goddess counterattack, before unleashing another punch toward the life goddess. Construct a barrier of life and death with my blood. In this dire situation, the life goddess blood suddenly converged to form a crimson vortex of reincarnation. Boom! The rainbow fist crashed into the crimson vortex before sinking deeply into it. Chapter 23-24. The sea heavenly robe of the life goddess had already been destroyed. Lin had initially wanted to punch the life goddess to death again. However, to his surprise, the life goddess' reaction speed and the power she possessed were far beyond his imagination. She was able to instantly use her blood to create that crimson vortex known as the Wall of Life and Death. The immensely powerful heavenly Tao 5-elemental explosion sank into the vortex just like that, where its vitality was being whittled away by the extreme power of death imbued within the vortex. Lin knew that he was definitely no match for the life goddess in terms of actual combat. The power of life and death that she possessed was simply too freakish. Even in such a hurried situation, she was still able to use her own blood to construct such an insane defense. Lin could sense that the power in his fist that he had been accumulating for a long time had been completely engulfed by the crimson vortex in a one-on-one battle. He really was no match for the life goddess. However, he had Tina. A streak of light flashed toward him from the side. An extremely beautiful woman flapped her golden fairy wings, and she stabbed her sword toward the life goddess' heart at an incredible speed. The jade hairpin tried to intercept her, but it was still too slow and couldn't keep up with the extreme speed that the fairy was able to unleash. The heavenly life goddess gritted her teeth and barely managed to shift her position, but the world sword still slashed through the side of her chest, leaving behind a deep gash. Tina brushed past the life goddess and was just about to unleash a second sword strike, but the jade hairpin was already flying toward her at this moment. If Tina didn't defend herself, this attack would be extremely lethal. However, at this moment, a cold light flashed through the fairy's eyes, and the world sword shifted its angle slightly before continuing toward the life goddess with an unstoppable force. "You're insane!" The life goddess' heart jolted upon seeing Tina's decisiveness. There was no time for her to evade as the sword was simply far too fast. Furthermore, the trajectory of the sword overlapped with the trajectory of the jade hairpin. The blade of the sword collided with the jade hairpin, thereby altering the trajectory of the jade hairpin. When the jade hairpin pierced through Tina's arm, the world sword had already pierced through the life goddess' heart from behind. Tina's unparalleled decisiveness and reaction speed allowed her to successfully turn the tables on the life goddess. The world sword pierced into the life goddess' heart. This made the life goddess feel an intense sense of death once again. The sword intent instantly annihilated her heart. Not only that, but the divine mirror particles also began to grow like viruses, increasing in size and devouring her power in a frenzy. The heavenly life goddess was most wary of Tina's divine mirror world sword. And now Tina's divine mirror world sword had dealt her another lethal blow. "Die!" The heavenly life goddess flared up with rage, and she stabbed her jade hairpin repeatedly toward the little fairy, leaving countless lethal web-like trajectories in her wake. Tina was in a perilous situation, and she was almost fatally stabbed several times. Until Enlin sent the goddess of life, flying with a punch. The extremely majestic fist force smashed the body of the living being to the point of distorting and deforming. The living being was directly blasted hundreds of kilometers away, and it smashed a huge mountain that was 100,000 meters tall into two. Only then did it stop flying backward. When the life goddess was flying backward, she cut her body in half, and her upper body was cut in half. Enlin and Tina were both dumbstruck upon seeing this. Then, the life goddess, whose upper body had been sliced to the point where she couldn't even survive, used her supreme authority of life to repair her body in a second. This was an unfathomable power of life. Tina had only recovered from most of her non-lethal wounds, but the life goddess had completely recovered from her lethal wounds, and she had even removed the corrosive effects of the divine mirror particles. Anyone would be driven mad by this kind of insane regenerative ability, and they would even be struck by a deep sense of powerlessness. Enlin and Tina were also struck by this feeling. However, they also knew that this was not the time for despair. This was the best time to retaliate. Enlin's fist and Tina's sword projections enshrouded the life goddess again, and they unleashed a frenzied barrage of attacks upon her. The life goddess aura was no longer as peerless as before, and she was forced into a passive position. Time and time again, divine mountains were destroyed, forests of divine trees were uprooted, and immortal rivers were cut off. In this realm that was filled with miracles and opportunities, a peculiar scene appeared. Enlin and Tina chased the life goddess relentlessly, while close to 100 primordial beasts chased after Enlin and Tina in a frenzy. The pursuit and escape of the three parties were natural, and no one knew how long it would last. Life, you've already activated your Tao true form. Why are you still being chased? Retaliate! Retaliate! The heavenly sea god couldn't help but complain at the sight of the heavenly life goddess' pathetic display. Shut the hell up! Otherwise, I'll toss your true body out and let you fight. The life goddess' brows furrowed. The heavenly sea god didn't dare to say anything upon hearing this. He could still fight with his mouth, but if he were to really toss him out, he would be tortured by Enlin. If it weren't for the fact that your Tao true form was forced out long ago, we wouldn't be in such a passive position. Useless trash. The heavenly life goddess was enraged by the heavenly sea god's words, and she had completely disregarded their alliance. The heavenly sea god's expression was extremely dark, but he couldn't come up with any retort. The three-phase true heavenly reincarnation formation was extremely profound. If the three true forms were to return to their original positions, then their power would truly be unparalleled. They would be able to crush Lin and Tina with ease, so why would they be in such a passive position? They could only blame themselves for being too useless in the past. The heavenly light goddess had taken advantage of a loophole, at this moment, in the northern region of the White Nectar Sea. Shangguan-Yi charged toward the inky black rift in the sky, and her white dress danced in the wind like a peerless white lotus blooming in the night sky. She endured bolts of devastating primordial divine lightning before disappearing into the darkness and chaos. In the blink of an eye, the origin energy of extreme frost transformed into blue frost that enshrouded the entire sky. Heaven and earth plunged into a frigid winter again. The White Nectar Sea was sealed off, and snow fell from the sky. She had taken the initiative to charge toward the heavenly Tao, and all living beings were given a fright. It had always been the heavenly Tao that dealt with her, but this time she was charging toward the heavenly Tao and challenging it. So this is what a true heavenly disciple is capable of, right? Michael murmured to himself as he looked at the white figure disappearing into the rift in the sky. She's not even a member of the heaven-crushing sect, but her heaven-crushing abilities are more powerful than ours. I'm such a failure as a heavenly disciple candidate. The battling Buddha sighed with emotion. Even though they had mastered the most intricate heaven-crushing techniques, did they have the ability to face the true heavenly Tao? Of course not. However, Shangguan-Yi had done it. Shangguan-Yi had taken the initiative to charge toward the heavenly Tao on her own, and even the heavens had been frozen solid. How many beings in this world could face the true heavenly Tao head-on? Cyril, Chun-Chun, An and Lin. Aside from them, there was no one else. That was what Shangguan-Yi was doing now. She was doing what a heavenly disciple should do. Chapter 23-25. In the northeastern region of the Tai Chu continent, within the barren and cracked Purple Star ruins, winds and clouds surged at the center of the ruins. Cyril had changed into a set of platinum battle robes, and his robes billowed in the wind as he slowly stabbed his black and white heaven-crushing spear into the sky. His crimson eyes trembled slightly, and a hint of a smile appeared on his face. The 4-9 Immortal sect has acted very quickly, and the imbalance in the heavenly Tao has already been rectified. What an extraordinary group of beings! Chen nodded. They are a group of trustworthy friends. The imbalance of the heavenly Tao was a huge problem even for the heaven-crushing sect, but the 4-9 Immortal sect was able to take care of it perfectly. This was a clear indication of just how powerful the 4-9 Immortal sect was. Chen thought to himself for a moment before adding, "We have to work hard as well. We can't disappoint them." He wasn't a person who talked a lot. However, he was feeling a little guilty when he thought about how Lin was facing off against the three paramount heavenly gods in the White Nectar Sea. This pressure shouldn't have been shouldered by Lin. However, seeing as Lin had already stepped forward, he couldn't disappoint his friends. At the very least, he had to do what he had to do. After unleashing the heaven-crushing star, Chen saw two extremely majestic figures appearing in the sky above. One of them was a massive woman with the power of light revolving around her body, and she held a translucent little sapling in her hand. The other was a man in spiky armor with a pair of dark eyes that were filled with killing intent, but there was also a hint of deathly stillness in his eyes, and he held a decayed skull in his hand. Chen eyes narrowed slightly. He knew that the 9 tribulations of the heavenly Tao were about to arrive. This was the 5th tribulation. The woman and the man in spiky armor turned their eyes upon Cyril and Chen, as if they knew that these two were the true pillars of the heaven-crushing sect. Is this an individual tribulation? Cyril's expression became slightly grave as he gripped his heaven-crushing spear tightly. At this moment, Chen had already unleashed his spotless realm. A faint white light enshrouded his entire body, and nothing between heaven and earth was able to enter his domain. There were 9 tribulations in the heavenly Tao, but they didn't know which 9 tribulations they were or what the true manifestations of the tribulations were like. Only a true expert, a truly perfect expert, would have the courage to face these unknown disasters. The woman of light looked at Chen Chen, and the sapling in her hand slowly grew, releasing a power that was filled with hope and beauty. Life. The spiked armored man's eyes were dark and deathly still. The skull in his hand continued to decay. Or death? As soon as he finished speaking, a gigantic millstone of life and death that encompassed heaven and earth suddenly appeared beneath the feet of the 2 mighty beings. Half of it was deathly still and withered, while the other half was lush and green. It released an absolute aura of life and death as it revolved endlessly. At this moment, both Chen Chen and Cyril were enlightened. This was a multiple-choice question: choose life or choose death. There were 2 obvious spots on the millstone of life and death. One was life, and the other was death. They had to stand on those 2 spots to survive this calamity. As for who lived and who died, that would be up to Chen Chen and Cyril to decide. It was a simple game, but it was also a game of certain death. How could the 2 of them refuse? This millstone of life and death was imbued with the paramount laws of heaven and earth. This was an absolute law of the heavenly Tao that was even more powerful than the law of life and death controlled by the paramount heavenly God, the heavenly life God. This law was manifested from the power of the Tai Chu continent, the boundless realm of stars, as well as countless great worlds and small worlds. Even the paramount heavenly gods were afraid of the backlash from the heavenly Tao. Chen Chen and Cyril were also very wary. However, when faced with the choice of life or death, their solemn expressions quickly disappeared, and they both revealed a smile at the same time. Cyril shook his head with a smile. How terrifying! One is life, the other is death. Are they forcing me to sacrifice myself? Chen Chen pursed his lips. Don't pretend. This is a completely pointless question. Cyril nodded. That's indeed the case. The heavenly Tao has given us a very difficult multiple-choice question, but we can choose not to do it. What right does the heavenly Tao have to give us a multiple-choice question? The 2 of them looked at each other to confirm their suspicions. Boundless and unimaginably powerful energy erupted from their bodies at the same time before soaring into the heavens. Just how powerful were Chen Chen and Cyril? At this moment, Chen Chen's spotless white realm expanded in a frenzy, annihilating all time, space, matter, and energy it came into contact with. Cyril's extremely sharp and domineering true demon origin energy pierced through the heavens like a divine sword, and his sword intent transformed into a spiral sword cloud that spanned tens of thousands of kilometers. The woman and the armored man's expressions shifted slightly. What do you want? Disobedience will result in eternal damnation from the wrath of the heavens. The woman enshrouded in light spoke in a calm voice. Cyril raised the heaven-crushing spear in one hand and the 9 heavens' true demon sword in the other before slashing down upon the millstone of life and death. I'm disobeying the heavens. The thing I'm least afraid of is the wrath of the heavens, Chen Chen said calmly. The spotless realm around him wreaked havoc in a radius of 30,000 kilometers, severing all the nomological laws between heaven and earth and dragging the millstone of life and death, as well as the woman and the armored man, into the spotless realm. The true demon sword fell at this moment, and the spotless realm opened up a space for it. At this moment, the nomological laws that were reputed to be the hardest and most indestructible in the heavenly Tao erupted with an extremely sharp screech. The spotless realm and true demon origin energy erupted, engulfing heaven and earth with boundless might. The millstone of life and death was engulfed by the energy. The woman screamed as her body and the sapling in her hand were both annihilated at the same time. The armored man's armor instantly shattered, and his rotten head didn't even have a chance to do anything before it was completely annihilated by the true demon origin energy. The heaven-crushing sect members couldn't help but feel suffocated at the sight of this earth-shattering power, even though they were separated by the heaven-crushing glazed palace's spell formation. The boundless might penetrated the spell formation, making everyone feel as if heaven and earth were about to be blasted into smithereens by the two heavenly disciples. Is this the true combat prowess of the heavenly disciples? The ancient dragon empress looked at the spotless realm before her eyes, as well as the surging true demon origin energy, and she suddenly felt like her heavenly disciple was so cheap after the energy dissipated. The woman of light, the armored man, and the paramount nomological laws, the millstone of life and death, all disappeared into thin air. Only the two of them stood silently on the battlefield. In the eyes of super-mighty figures, and even in the eyes of gods of creation, the fifth heavenly Tao tribulation of life and death, which was the most terrifying and difficult choice to make, had been violently vanquished by Chun Chun and Cyril. To them, this tribulation was a freebie. Chapter 23-26. The grinders of life and death were reinforced by the nomological laws of countless worlds. However, Chun Chen's spotless realm could completely sever the connection between the grinders of life and death and the myriad of worlds. This was also the reason why Cyril was able to slice through the grinders of life and death with a single strike. After the fifth heavenly tribulation was broken, the heavenly Tao seemed to loosen up again. Cyril's heaven-shattering process sped up again, and the black and white heaven-shattering spear penetrated a few more centimeters. The pitch-black crack in the sky continued to split into smaller cracks. Once it reached a certain size, the sky and the heavenly Tao would instantly shatter like fragile glass. A rotating life and death formation appeared behind Chun Chun. A black seal filled with deathly stillness appeared in his hand, and he slowly pressed it toward the sky. At this moment, everything was silent and still. Heaven-shattering sixth technique. Heavenly Tao Absolute Reincarnation. The black seal imprinted itself in the sky and quickly expanded. The heavenly Tao trembled violently, and reincarnation was severed. The heavenly Tao was completely sealed off. Chun Chen's attack penetrated the heavenly Tao once again. The heavenly Tao's reincarnation power was sealed off with a single strike. Its existence was being crushed step by Chun Chen's heaven-shattering techniques. At this moment, a change occurred in the sky again. A faceless man holding a scale in his hand slowly appeared at the peak of the sky. He wore an extremely neat and symmetrical black cloud robe. All of the patterns and details on his body, including the distribution and direction of his hair, were absolutely symmetrical. The faceless man was 100 feet tall, and there were 2 white trays on the scale in his hand. There was a person standing on the left tray, and there was also another person standing on the right tray. When the supreme beings of the heaven-crushing sect saw the person on the left, their expressions all changed drastically. They discovered that this person was actually the second heavenly disciple's attendant, Shuiyan. No way, she really is Mistress Shuiyan? Ah, Shuiyan really disappeared. How did she get there? All the heaven-crushing sect members were astonished to discover that Shuiyan, who had been standing with them, had suddenly appeared on the faceless man's scale. Not only them, but even Shuiyan was also in a daze. She only came to her senses after a few seconds, and she immediately transformed into a wisp of frosty blue energy in an attempt to escape, only to be blocked by an invisible barrier. Shuiyan. Chun Chen's eyes trembled slightly as he looked toward the woman on the scale. How did he do that? Cyril was also momentarily stunned. This move had already surpassed the realm of spatial teleportation. It was more like a decision made by the will of an absolute ruler. I want you to be there, so you are there. There was no other way. There was no other way. It was just the will that determined the truth. This was the will of the heavens. Shuiyan, who was trapped within, even unleashed her heaven-crushing techniques to attack the invisible barrier. However, it was to no avail. On the other side of the scale, an old woman without any cultivation base appeared. She was at a loss at first, but then she was so frightened by the terrifying scene in front of her that she fell to the ground. Ah! Help! Someone save me! Where is this place? Who are you people? Why do you want to capture me? She screamed for help, releasing the fear in her heart. It was quite clear that this was an extremely ordinary mortal that the faceless man had deliberately transferred over from the kingdom of the 9 states. From the very beginning, the two sides of the scale were on two different levels. Above Shui Yan and the old woman was a sharp blade that was as red as blood. It was releasing an extremely dense and terrifying aura of death. The faceless man turned toward Chen Chen, and his voice sounded. Between the two of them, who is more important in your heart? If two people are about to face death and only one can survive, who would you rather live? The faceless man's voice was distant and ethereal, penetrating directly into Chen Chen's heart. Chen Chen's heart trembled at this moment. The last heavenly tribulation was a choice of life and death between him and Cyril. This time, the heavenly tribulation was a choice of life and death between Shui Yan and an ordinary woman? From the outside, this choice was very similar to the previous choice. In fact, it was even easier to choose. He didn't even need to think about it to know that he had to choose Shui Yan. However, this question was actually even more difficult. The faceless man was interrogating Chen Chen's heart. What was life? What was fairness? As the heavens, could they treat Shui Yan and the ordinary woman equally, as if they were completely unrelated lives? If even the heavens lost their fairness and everything was subjective, then how could this world maintain absolute balance? Then how could he have the right to be called the heavens? This was a multiple-choice question, but in essence, it wasn't a multiple-choice question at all. In fact, the faceless man didn't even need Chen Chen to make a choice. As long as Chen Chen was a person, the answer to this choice would be unquestionable. The interrogation of one's Tao heart was superior to all attacks. The faceless man only wanted to attack Chen Chen's Tao heart. Could Chen Chen and Cyril forcefully break through everything like they did in the previous tribulation? They couldn't because Shui Yan was in the faceless man's hands. If they decided to make a move, they wouldn't be able to save her in time. Chen Chen could only choose to save Shui Yan through this choice. Once he made a choice, his Tao heart would definitely be affected. Thus, this was actually an open and above-board attack. However, at this moment, Shui Yan threw herself at the blood blade without any regard for her own safety. Shui Yan! Lady Shui Yan! The other Heaven Breaker members all cried out in alarm. Shui Yan actually wanted to use her own death to help Chen Chen escape this predicament. Chen Chen's heart trembled. A cold light suddenly flashed in his hand. At this moment, Shui Yan, who was flying toward the blood blade, was blocked by an invisible force. She couldn't do anything to harm herself. Don't be anxious. Only the Son of Heaven has the right to choose in this matter, the faceless man said emotionlessly. The faceless man had casually deprived Shui Yan of the right to choose whether to live or die. If he could prevent Shui Yan from dying, he could naturally prevent Shui Yan from living. Thus, all the pressure fell on Chen Chen. Chen Chen took a deep breath and looked at the woman with red eyes. He then looked at the despairing old woman who was crying for help and had been tricked into this place for no reason. He pointed at Shui Yan and said, "I want her to live." As soon as he said this, almost everyone's heart trembled. The faceless man's tone carried a hint of mockery. "Oh? Why did you choose her? Is it because of love? Is she more important to you? So, for her, you're going to kill this old woman in disguise?" Chen Chen sensed the emotions in his heart. He knew that he couldn't transcend life and death. When he heard the faceless man's words, he smiled and said, "Who said that the heavens can't have emotions?" The faceless man shook his head. "Then you're not fit to be the heavens. You won't be able to successfully become the heavenly Tao on the scale." Shui Yan's restraints were removed. However, at the same time, the blood blade descended toward the old woman's head. Chapter 23-27. It's not up to you to decide whether I'm worthy of becoming the heaven. You don't have the right to judge whether I can become the heaven or not. In the instant that the crimson blade descended, the projection of billions of stars suddenly appeared in Chen Chen's eyes. The vast universe within his body was completely unleashed at this instant, bringing with it extreme nomological laws and extreme power. Whoosh! At some point, Chen Chen's position had switched with the mortal old woman's. The situation was now that Chen Chen was facing the incoming crimson blade. The members of the heaven-crushing sect were all very familiar with this scene. This was how Shui Yan had been transferred back then. They didn't expect Chen Chen to also have this kind of ability. It was the kind of mighty power that could turn a thought into reality. This was the power of the great universe's intent. The faceless man's voice was dark. If you dare to break the rules, you must bear the consequences. Almost instantaneously, the other two crimson blades were already hovering above Shui Yan and the mortal old woman's heads, unleashing a terrifying killing intent. At this moment, the blood blade had already landed on Chen Chen's body, but it was disintegrated into the tiniest particles by his spotless land. It was as if a gust of wind had blown away the monstrous killing intent of the blood blade. Everything returned to dust, everything returned to earth. Not only that, but white halos that belonged to the spotless realm also appeared on Shui Yan and the mortal old woman's bodies, directly disintegrating the descending crimson blades into dust. The faceless man retaliated, but he couldn't do anything. Regardless of whether it's Shui Yan or the mortal old woman, I have to save them. The handsome youth looked at the faceless man calmly. Even if you are the heaven now, you can't change this. Ha ha! The faceless man laughed. But you've already made your choice. Your Tao heart. Do you see your Tao heart? He didn't seem disappointed at all. Instead, he laughed even more carefreely, as if he had won this round. Chen Chen didn't say anything, and he stood there silently. However, for some reason, a hint of regret and resignation appeared on his face. Cyril cursed in his heart upon seeing this. Chen Chen. The guilt on Shui Yan's face deepened upon seeing Chen Chen like this. She clenched her fists tightly as she hated herself for being useless. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. Tears fell from the corners of her snowy face. She had a vague understanding that she had perhaps been used by the faceless man to destroy Chen Chen's Tao heart. Sigh, it's not because of you, it's because of me. Chen Chen looked at the crying girl with a gentle gaze and shook his head. Perhaps I shouldn't have walked the path of the heavenly Tao, the path of emotionlessness and desirelessness. Even if he didn't admit it verbally, he would think so in his heart. He could say that no one could decide whether or not he could become the heavenly Tao. He could also say that it was fine even if the heavenly Tao had feelings. However, he cultivated the Tao of the heavenly Tao like dust. It should be the fairest heavenly Tao. This method of becoming the heaven Tao was the safest, but if Chen Chen himself was unable to be emotionless and desireless, then this method would definitely be accompanied by extremely great risks. The faceless man had only used some conditions to expose his Tao heart. This was a bomb. Regardless of whether the faceless man appeared or not, it was still a bomb. Very good. The faceless man's scale emitted the light of heaven. Next, let's begin the second multiple-choice question. Chen Chen slapped the faceless man. Get lost. Boom! A power as vast and boundless as the universe erupted from his body, materializing into a massive pillar of pure white light that soared into the sky, annihilating everything it came into contact with. The faceless man's body, as well as his scale, was reduced to dust by the pillar of pure white light. Peace and quiet returned to heaven and earth. The terrifying being who had once exerted immense pressure upon the heaven-crushing sect members had been slapped into oblivion by Chen Chen. That's it? Holy F***ck, that's way too bad *SS. He destroyed the heavenly Tao's tribulation with a single slap. That faceless man hasn't even finished speaking yet. Does the heavenly Tao not care about its reputation? Did heavenly disciple Chen Chen win? No, that's not actually a victory for Chen Chen. The ancient dragon empress shook her head with a concerned expression. She looked at the young man who was standing tall in the sky. It was as if nothing had happened. Her heart ached. This young man had far too many burdens on his back. Chen Chen had made a choice that was acceptable to everyone. He had even perfectly resolved the tribulation and saved the old mortal woman. However, the ancient dragon empress knew that Chen Chen hadn't actually won. In fact, he had lost. He had lost because of his Tao heart, and he had lost because of the Tao that he had always upheld. Chen Chen had already viewed Shui Yan as an important person in his heart. Even if the person on the other side of the scale wasn't a mortal, and was instead an important member of the heaven-crushing sect, Chen Chen would still make the same choice. The sixth tribulation, the heaven-crushing tribulation, had already concluded. Cyril's expression had already darkened. He knew better than anyone else just how terrifying this tribulation was. He was the only one who knew what Chen Chen was facing right now. Chen Chen had used a spatial teleportation spell technique to teleport the old mortal woman back to the kingdom of the Nine State. The old woman did not know what had happened from beginning to end. She only knew that someone wanted to kill her, and someone saved her. Her eyes flashed, and she suddenly returned to the original street. Looking at the bustling crowd, she was in a trance, as if she had just had a nightmare. The aura of heaven and earth surged from Chen Chen's palm. There were all things within his palm, including the sun, moon, and stars, as well as all life forms. It was as if his palm contained the entire Tao of heaven and earth. Heaven-crushing seventh technique, palm heaven. Chen Chen slammed his palm into the heavens, and an aura that looked down upon the entire world and reigned supreme over heaven and earth erupted forth. It was as if he was going to grasp the entire heavenly Tao firmly in his palm. Then, he crushed it. Chen Chen crushed it viciously, and the sound of the heavenly Tao cracking could be heard. It was as if he had crushed an egg. Of course, this egg was the core of the heavenly Tao. The heavens began to collapse, and destructive chaotic turbulence seeped out from the massive crack in the center. During this process, the chaotic turbulence gradually covered the entire sky, tearing apart the heavens that were struggling to hold on. Finally, the heavens couldn't hold on any longer, and it shattered like an eggshell. The heavens began to fall. Chen Chen stood in the center of the falling heavens, and he slowly extended a hand toward the falling heavens. Freeze! It was as if he had received a decree from the heavens. The falling heavens suddenly stopped, and it hovered in the air. Aside from the shattered starry sky and the shattered moon, there was only boundless darkness and chaos. Everything appeared to be destroyed. The heaven-crushing sect members who were closest to the aura of destruction felt an indescribable sense of terror. It was as if they were the ones who would be destroyed in the next instant. However, their heaven-crushing Tao allowed them to overcome this sense of terror, and they continued to pour energy into the heaven-crushing formation. Right at this moment, countless eyes suddenly appeared within the pitch-black chaos, and they stared down at the living beings on the ground.